When a billionaire's private jet exploded over the Pacific Ocean, Daniel Cross had 3 seconds to make an impossible choice: save himself or die trying to reach the emergency raft. But he wasn't alone in that burning wreckage. A woman he'd never spoken to, a stranger from the cheap seats, was crawling through the smoke toward the same exit. Neither of them knew that surviving the crash was just the beginning, because the island waiting below, it didn't care about money. It didn't care about status. It only cared if you were strong enough to make it through the night. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The first thing Daniel Cross noticed was the smell. Not smoke, not fuel. Something worse. The electrical burn of circuits dying, plastic melting, insulation turning to poison in the air. He'd been asleep when it started, curled awkwardly in the leather seat he'd paid $40,000 for, his daughter's drawing clutched against his chest. 7 years old, and she'd given him a stick-figure family portrait before he left. Daddy with his briefcase, Sophie with her backpack, their dog Max with his tongue hanging out. Daddy always comes home, she'd written in purple crayon at the bottom. The turbulence hit like a fist. Daniel's eyes snapped open as the cabin lurched sideways. His Scotch glass, Macallan 25, because why the hell not, shot across the table and shattered against the bulkhead. The flight attendant, Marcus, stumbled forward, caught himself on a seatback, his professional smile already cracking at the edges. "Sir, we're experiencing some rough air. If you could please—" The plane dropped. Not the gentle dip of normal turbulence. This was a stomach-in-your-throat, gravity-forgetting fall that lasted 3 seconds too long. Daniel's seatbelt bit into his lap. His phone, mid-email to his CFO about the Singapore merger, flew from his hand and cracked against the ceiling. Then the screaming started. Not from him, from somewhere behind the partition that separated his private cabin from the rest of the aircraft. He'd been so focused on work, on sleep, on anything but thinking about leaving Sophie for another business trip that he'd barely registered the other passengers during boarding. Maybe 20 people total on this charter flight. Most of them his employees heading to the Tokyo conference. A few random travelers who'd bought last-minute tickets through the charter company. Their screams turned his blood cold. "Marcus!" Daniel shouted, but the attendant was already gone, stumbling toward the cockpit through another violent shake. The lights cut out. Emergency strips glowed along the floor, bathing everything in sick green. Daniel's hands found the buckle. Muscle memory from 1,000 flights, but his fingers fumbled. The plane was still dropping, or maybe tilting. He couldn't tell anymore. His inner ear screamed wrong signals. The bourbon he'd drunk before passing out rose in his throat. Another lurch. Metal shrieked somewhere deep in the fuselage. Then fire. It started small, a flicker of orange beneath the cockpit door, almost pretty in the darkness. But fire on a plane doesn't stay small. It spreads like rage, like hunger, consuming oxygen and reason in equal measure. Within seconds, smoke began pouring through the ventilation, thick and black, and absolutely wrong. Daniel got the buckle open, stood, immediately fell as the plane yawed hard to port. His shoulder slammed into the bulkhead. Pain exploded through his collarbone, sharp and bright and clarifying. The bourbon fog burned away. His father's voice echoed in his head. "Crossmen don't panic. Crossmen think." Right, think. Emergency exit behind him, 6 feet away. Life raft, oxygen. Water if they made it down intact. The plane wasn't going to make it down intact. He could feel it in the way the engines sounded. One screaming too high, one silent, the asymmetric thrust pulling them into a death spiral. He'd taken enough flying lessons to know what that meant. They had minutes, maybe less. Daniel grabbed the armrest, pulled himself toward the emergency exit. The smoke was thicker now, burning his eyes, coating his throat. He yanked his shirt over his nose and mouth. Useless, but instinct demanded it. 3 steps. 4. His hand found the exit door handle. That's when he saw her. A woman, crawling through the smoke from the cabin behind him. Blood streamed from a gash on her forehead, mixing with the ash on her face, but her eyes, Christ, her eyes were clear, focused. She wasn't screaming, wasn't crying, just moving forward with mechanical precision, one hand over the other, dragging herself toward the same exit Daniel was reaching for. Their eyes met through the haze. "Help me with the door," she shouted. Not please. Not sir. Just a command, sharp and desperate and utterly human. Daniel hesitated. Every fiber of his being screamed to open that door, to save himself, to get back to Sophie because she needed her father and he'd promised. He'd promised her he'd always come home. But something in the woman's face stopped him. Maybe it was the blood. Maybe it was the way she kept moving even though her left leg was dragging uselessly behind her. Maybe it was just that he'd spent 32 years being Daniel Cross, son of Richard Cross, grandson of William Cross, heir to a fortune built on making hard choices, and somewhere in all that privilege he'd forgotten what it meant to be just human. He grabbed her arm, pulled her up. She gasped, bit back a scream as weight hit her injured leg. "What's your name?" Daniel shouted over the shrieking metal. "Elena, door, now!" Together they yanked the emergency handle. Nothing happened. The door was jammed, or the pressure differential was too great, or the frame had warped from heat. Daniel threw his shoulder against it. Once, twice. Pain shot through his already injured collarbone, but he didn't stop. Elena added her weight, and together they slammed into the door like battering rams. It gave. Not elegantly, not smoothly. The door ripped free with a sound like the world ending, and suddenly they were staring at nothing but night sky and ocean and wind that hit like a physical blow. The cabin depressurized in an instant. Everything not bolted down became a missile. Daniel's laptop shot past his head. A briefcase. Someone's jacket. Paper swirled like confetti at a funeral. "The raft!" Elena screamed, pointing at the yellow package mounted beside the door. Daniel's hands found it on autopilot. Pull the cord. Yank the package free. Throw it out into the screaming void and pray the automatic inflation worked, because if it didn't, they were dead. The raft tumbled into darkness. 1 second, 2, 3. It inflated with a whump of compressed air, bright yellow against the black water rushing up to meet them. "Jump!" Daniel shouted. "Are you insane? We're still—" The explosion cut her off. Not in the cockpit. Somewhere deeper, in the cargo hold or the fuel tanks. The plane bucked like a wild animal, and suddenly there was no more time for questions or plans or anything except the simple animal imperative to move. Daniel grabbed Elena's hand. She grabbed back, and together they jumped into nothing. The fall lasted forever. The fall lasted a heartbeat. Daniel had time to think about Sophie, about her purple crayon and her stick figures and her absolute certainty that Daddy always comes home. He had time to think about the Singapore merger, about the quarterly report sitting unsigned on his desk, about the watch on his wrist that cost more than most people made in a year. He had time to realize that none of it mattered. None of it had ever mattered, because he was about to die in the Pacific Ocean, and his daughter would grow up thinking he'd abandoned her. Then he hit the water. The impact drove every thought from his mind, cold, so cold it burned. Salt water forced its way into his nose, his mouth, his lungs. He thrashed, couldn't tell which way was up, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His father's voice. "Crossmen don't panic." But his father had never drowned in the Pacific, had he? His father had died in a hospital bed surrounded by lawyers and accountants, not alone in an ocean that didn't know his name. Something grabbed his collar, yanked, hard. Daniel broke the surface, coughing, gagging, alive. Elena treaded water beside him, her face a mask of determination despite the blood still streaming from her forehead. "Raft!" she shouted. "Swim!" The yellow raft bobbed 30 feet away, miraculously upright, miraculously intact. Above them, pieces of the plane rained down like meteors. A seat, a section of wing, something that might have been a person, but Daniel couldn't look, couldn't think about it, could only swim. His shoulders screamed, his lungs burned. Salt water and smoke had turned his throat to sandpaper. But he swam. Elena swam beside him, her injured leg useless, her arms doing all the work. They reached the raft together, grabbed the rope handles together, pulled themselves up and in together. For 10 seconds, they just lay there, breathing, alive. Then the plane hit the water behind them. The impact created a wave that lifted their tiny raft like a toy, sent it surfing across the Pacific, spun it in circles until Daniel couldn't tell ocean from sky. He grabbed the rope. Elena grabbed him. They held on while physics tried to kill them one more time. When the wave finally passed, when the world stopped spinning, Daniel forced himself to look back. The plane was gone, sinking fast, trailing bubbles and fuel and debris. A few pieces still floated, a cushion, a briefcase, what looked like Marcus's jacket, but no people, no other rafts, no sounds except the ocean and Elena's ragged breathing beside him. "There has to be others," Daniel said. His voice came out raw, barely human. "There were 20 people on that flight." Elena didn't answer. She was staring at the horizon, her face unreadable. "There has to be—" "Look," she said quietly. Daniel followed her gaze. At first, he saw nothing but darkness, but as his eyes adjusted, he realized the darkness had a shape, a silhouette, an island, maybe 2 miles distant, black against the slightly less black sky. "We need to paddle," Elena said, "before the current takes us past it. But the others are dead." She said it flat, certain. "We're alive. We stay that way by moving." Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to shout that they had to search, had to try, had to do something because he was Daniel Cross, and Cross men solved problems, fixed things, made the world bend to their will. But Elena was already moving, grabbing the small paddle attached to the raft's interior, dipping it into the water with mechanical precision. He grabbed the other paddle. Together they started rowing toward the island that might save them or might kill them, but either way was better than dying in the open ocean. The swim to shore took 3 hours. Not because the distance was far, Daniel's exhausted brain estimated maybe 1.5 miles once they got moving, but because the current fought them every stroke. The Pacific had opinions about where their little raft should go, and none of those opinions included the island. Elena set the pace, her strokes steady, despite her injury, despite the blood loss, despite everything. Daniel matched her rhythm because stopping meant dying, and he'd already promised Sophie he'd come home. Halfway there, Elena spoke for the first time since they'd started paddling. "You were in the private cabin." Not a question. Daniel glanced at her. Her face was gray with exhaustion, but her eyes were sharp. "Yeah," he said. "First class must be nice." He couldn't tell if she was being sarcastic or just stating fact. "It's comfortable. I was in 18C middle seat, back row, next to a guy who snored and a woman who kept elbowing me every time she opened her book." She paused, dipped her paddle. "Paid $300 for that ticket, saved for 6 months." Daniel didn't know what to say. His ticket? Well, he owned part of the charter company, so he didn't really have a ticket. He just flew. "Where were you going?" he asked instead. "Job interview in Tokyo, translator position at a tech firm. They were going to pay for my hotel, give me a whole week to decide if I wanted the job." Her voice cracked just slightly. "I left my apartment key with my neighbor, told her I'd be back in 8 days with stories about sushi and bullet trains." "You'll still make it," Daniel said, and immediately felt like an idiot. They were shipwrecked, bleeding, rowing toward an unknown island in the middle of the Pacific. Making it to a job interview in Tokyo was about as likely as sprouting wings. But Elena laughed. Actually laughed. Short and sharp and a little broken. "Sure, maybe they'll reschedule." They paddled in silence after that. Daniel's hands blistered, then bled, then went numb. His shoulder was definitely broken. Every stroke sent lightning up his neck. But stopping wasn't an option. The island grew closer. Features began to resolve in the darkness. Trees, rocks, a strip of pale beach barely visible against the black water. "There," Elena said, pointing with her paddle. "That break in the rocks. We can land there." Daniel saw it. A gap in the reef where waves were breaking white against dark stone. Threading that gap in the darkness with a rubber raft and broken bodies seemed like asking to die. But Elena was already angling them toward it, reading the water like a language Daniel had never learned. "You've done this before," he said. "Grew up in coastal Puerto Rico. My dad took me fishing in a boat smaller than this raft." Another stroke. "You?" "Grew up in Manhattan. Closest I got to the ocean was the Hamptons, and we had a 70-foot yacht with a captain." "Must have been hard," Elena said dryly. "I'm just saying, I know what you're saying. You're saying you're rich and useless, and I should be grateful you're at least paddling." She shot him a look. "Am I close?" Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, started paddling harder. They hit the gap with 20 feet of clearance on either side. Plenty of room, except the swell caught them wrong, and suddenly they were surfing on a wave that wanted to smash them into coral. Elena shouted something Daniel couldn't hear over the roar of water. He dug his paddle in, trying to steer, but the ocean didn't care about his Harvard MBA or his stock portfolio or anything except the simple physics of wave and stone. The raft hit the beach sideways, flipped, dumped them both into shallow water. Daniel's face hit sand. Salt water filled his mouth. He pushed up, coughing, and realized he could stand. The water was only 2 feet deep. Behind him, waves crashed against rock. Ahead, dark beach stretched toward darker jungle. Elena? She was already crawling toward shore, dragging her bad leg. Her face set in lines of pain Daniel was starting to recognize. He stumbled after her, grabbed her arm, helped her the last few feet to dry sand. They collapsed together above the tide line. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Daniel could feel his heart hammering, his lungs working, his body inventorying damage. Broken collarbone, multiple lacerations, possible concussion, dehydration setting in. His expensive suit was torn to rags. His Patek Philippe watch was gone. His phone was at the bottom of the Pacific, and he was lying on an unknown beach with a woman whose last name he didn't even know. "Daniel," he said finally. Elena turned her head to look at him. "What?" "My name, Daniel Cross." "I know." That surprised him. "How?" "You're Daniel Cross. Your face was on the cover of Forbes last month. The billionaire who broke Silicon Valley, or something equally stupid." She coughed, spat blood. "Elena Ruiz, the woman who paid $300 for a middle seat." Daniel wanted to defend himself, to explain that he didn't ask for the Forbes profile, that his PR team handled all that he was just a guy trying to build something meaningful. But lying on a dark beach, bleeding and broken and utterly lost, all those defenses felt hollow. "I'm sorry," he said instead. "For what?" "For..." He gestured vaguely at everything. "This, the crash, being useless at paddling, I don't know, everything." Elena laughed again, that same sharp, broken sound. "You think this is your fault? The plane crash?" "No, I just..." "Daniel!" She said his name like a teacher correcting a slow student. "Shut up. Save your energy. We're going to need it." She was right. Of course she was right. Daniel shut his eyes and listened to the ocean behind them, the jungle ahead, the sound of their breathing slowly returning to normal. Alive. Against all probability, against every reasonable expectation, they were alive. Sophie's drawing was gone, dissolved in salt water somewhere between the plane and the beach. But her words remained, burned into Daniel's memory in purple crayon. Daddy always comes home. He would. Somehow, he would. Even if he had to crawl across the entire Pacific to do it. When Daniel woke, the sun was already high and angry. He knew it was angry because it felt personal. The way the light stabbed through his eyelids, the way the heat pressed down on his skin like punishment. His mouth tasted like he'd been licking batteries. His shoulder was a symphony of pain in 3 distinct movements, sharp, throbbing, and please God make it stop. He tried to sit up. His body vetoed the motion. "Don't!" Elena's voice came from somewhere to his left. "You've got a concussion, maybe a skull fracture. Moving fast is a bad idea." Daniel opened his eyes slowly. The world swam, settled, came into focus. Elena sat propped against a piece of driftwood 10 feet away, her injured leg stretched out in front of her, her makeshift bandage, torn from her shirt, already soaked through with blood. She looked like hell. Daniel suspected he looked worse. "How long was I out?" he asked. 3 hours, maybe 4. "Sun says mid-morning." She gestured at the sky with her chin. "I've been watching the beach. No boats, no planes, no smoke signals except ours." Daniel followed her gesture and saw a pathetic pile of damp wood smoking weakly in the sand. Not a fire, not even close. Just evidence of effort. "You tried to start a fire with wet wood?" "I tried to start a fire with everything. Wet wood, dry wood, hope, prayer, sheer force of will." Elena's voice was flat. "Turns out none of those work without matches." "Oof, friction," Daniel said. "You can use friction. Spin a stick fast enough." "I know how friction works, Forbes. I spent an hour trying before you woke up. Made a lot of smoke. No fire." She paused. "You want to try? Be my guest." Daniel did want to try. More than that, he wanted to succeed, to prove that his expensive education and his expensive life had equipped him with skills beyond signing contracts and reading balance sheets. He pushed himself upright, ignoring the protests from every muscle, and stumbled over to the woodpile. Elena watched with an expression that might have been amusement or might have been pity. Daniel couldn't tell. The first stick snapped after 30 seconds of effort. The second produced a blister before it produced smoke. The third made his broken collarbone scream so loudly he had to stop before he passed out. "Told you," Elena said. Daniel threw the stick into the ocean, childish but satisfying. "There has to be a way. People have been making fire for thousands of years without matches. Those people probably had 2 working arms. You have 2 working arms. I have 1 working leg. Want to trade?" They glared at each other across the beach. The sun beat down. The ocean whispered behind them. Somewhere in the jungle, a bird made a sound like laughter. Daniel sat down hard in the sand. "We're going to die here, aren't we?" "Probably," Elena said. "But not today. Today we figure out water." "Water?" "You know, the thing humans need to live. We've been swimming in salt water for hours. We're both dehydrated. And if we don't find fresh water in the next 12 hours, the concussion won't matter because we'll be dead anyway." She was right. Of course she was right. Daniel's throat felt like sandpaper, his lips were cracking, and his head was pounding in a way that had nothing to do with hitting the plane's ceiling. Water. They needed water. "The jungle," he said. "There has to be streams. Rain collection." "There has to be," Elena agreed. "Question is whether we can find them before heat stroke finds us." Daniel looked at her leg, at the blood seeping through her makeshift bandage, at the way she kept her weight shifted carefully to avoid putting pressure on it. "You can't walk," he said. "I can hop." "That's not walking. It's moving. Moving is better than dying." She met his eyes. "Unless you want to leave me here while you explore, I'll understand. You've got a daughter to get home to." Daniel's stomach dropped. "How do you know about Sophie?" "The drawing. You were holding it when they loaded you onto the plane. I saw it from my seat. Stick figures, purple crayon, Daddy always comes home, written at the bottom." Elena's voice softened, just slightly. "She's waiting for you." "So come with me," Daniel said. "We'll go slow. Daniel." Elena cut him off gently. "I'm bleeding. You're concussed. Neither of us is equipped for a jungle hike, but if we stay here without water, we're dead by sunset. So one of us needs to try." "Then I'll try." "With a broken collarbone and a head injury, you'll pass out halfway there." "Then we both go. We move together, rest when we need to, find water, come back." Elena studied him for a long moment. Daniel couldn't read her expression. Pain, exhaustion, and something else he couldn't name were all mixed together in her dark eyes. "You really don't know how to take care of yourself, do you?" she said finally. "I had people for that." "I bet you did." She laughed, short and sharp. "Fine. We go together. But if you pass out, I'm leaving you." "Fair." "I'm serious." "So am I." They stared at each other. The bird in the jungle laughed again. Elena held out her hand. Daniel took it. Together, they pulled each other upright and turned toward the dark wall of green that marked where beach became jungle. "Ready?" Elena asked. Daniel thought about Sophie, about his promise, about the fact that he'd never hiked through a jungle, never had to find water without turning on a tap, never had to survive on anything except money and privilege, and the assumption that someone else would handle the hard parts. "No," he said honestly, "but let's go anyway." They made it 30 feet before Elena's leg gave out. She didn't cry out, didn't gasp, just went down hard, catching herself on a tree root, her face going white with pain. Daniel grabbed her before she could fall completely, took her weight, felt his shoulder scream in protest. "I'm fine," Elena said through gritted teeth. "You're not fine. I said I'm fine." She pushed away from him, tested her weight on the bad leg, and immediately buckled again. This time Daniel didn't try to catch her. He just waited while she sat down in the sand and dirt and leaves, while she examined the blood-soaked bandage, while the reality of their situation settled over both of them like fog. "It's bad," she said finally. "I know." "No, I mean, it's bad. Something's torn, maybe severed. I can feel... She stopped, took a breath. I can't walk. Not really, not far enough to matter. Daniel knelt beside her. Then I'll go. You stay here, rest, and I'll find water. You have a concussion. I'll be careful. Daniel, what else do you want me to do? The frustration boiled over before he could stop it. Sit here? Wait? Hope someone finds us before we die of thirst? I can't just... He stopped, forced himself to breathe. I have to get home. I promised Sophie. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Okay, but you're not going blind. She pointed at the jungle. See those birds? The white ones circling about half a mile inland? Daniel squinted. Eventually spotted the birds, tiny white specks against blue sky. Yeah. Birds need water. Follow them. And if you find a stream, look for a container, coconut shell, hollow bamboo, anything that holds liquid. Fill it, bring it back. Don't drink until you're back here with me. Why? Because if you drink there and pass out there, you're dead and I'm dead. If you drink here and pass out here, at least I can try to keep you alive until you wake up. It made sense. Daniel hated that it made sense. Hated that Elena had thought 3 steps ahead while he was still processing step 1. But sense didn't care about his feelings. Got it, he said. Birds, water, container, come back. And Daniel? Elena caught his wrist as he started to stand. Don't try to be a hero. If it's too far, if you're too hurt, if anything feels wrong, turn around. Dying alone in the jungle doesn't get you home to Sophie. He wanted to argue, wanted to say that crossmen didn't quit, didn't surrender, didn't turn around when things got hard. But looking at Elena, at her blood-soaked leg and her exhausted face, and her eyes that had already seen too much, he realized that maybe crossmen had been doing it wrong. I'll be back, he said instead. You better be. I didn't survive a plane crash just to die of thirst watching the ocean. Daniel started walking. The jungle swallowed him within 20 steps, green and humid and alive in ways that made his city-trained senses scream alerts. Every shadow might be danger, every sound might be a threat. Birds called warnings, insects hummed accusations. The air itself felt thick, pressing against his skin like hands. He followed the white birds. Distance lost meaning quickly. Daniel tried counting steps but gave up after 300 when the numbers blurred together. His concussed brain insisted that time was moving strangely, stretching, compressing, looping back on itself. He'd been walking for hours. He'd been walking for minutes. The white birds were closer. The white birds were farther. His shoulder hurt. His shoulder had always hurt. His shoulder would never stop hurting. Focus, he told himself. Birds. Water. Sophie. The birds led him uphill, not steep, but steady, and every step sent fresh agony through his broken collarbone. Daniel gritted his teeth, kept moving, thought about Sophie's stick figures and purple crayon and absolute certainty that Daddy always comes home. That's when he heard it. Water. Not ocean waves, not rain, the specific burble and splash of a stream moving over rocks, the sound every nature documentary had trained him to recognize, even if he'd never actually encountered it in person. Daniel broke into a stumbling run. The stream was small, maybe 3 feet wide, moving fast over smooth stones, but it was clear and cold and real. Daniel fell to his knees beside it, cupped his hands, brought water to his cracked lips. Don't drink until you're back here with me. Elena's voice in his memory. Strong, certain, probably right. Daniel lowered his hands. The water spilled through his fingers back into the stream. He needed a container. Looking around, he saw nothing useful, just rocks and ferns and trees. No convenient coconuts lying around. No hollow bamboo. No... Wait. 20 feet downstream, caught between 2 rocks, a piece of metal. Torn and twisted, but recognizable. Part of the plane. A section of hull, maybe, or a door panel, about the size of a dinner plate and curved like a shallow bowl. Daniel stumbled over to it, grabbed it with both hands. Mistake, his shoulder screamed, and examined it closely. No sharp edges, no fuel residue. Just bent metal, still bearing the charter company's logo. It would work. He filled it carefully from the stream, watching water collect in the curved depression. Half a gallon, maybe. Not much, but enough to keep them alive for a day. Enough to buy time. Don't drink. Daniel looked at the water, looked at the stream. His body begged him to just take one sip, one swallow, just enough to wet his throat. Don't. He turned around and started walking back toward the beach. The return trip took longer. Daniel moved carefully, both hands on the metal bowl, watching every step. His concussed brain played tricks, making shadows into obstacles, making distance into taffy that stretched and snapped. Twice he stopped, convinced he was lost. Twice he forced himself to keep moving toward the sound of ocean waves. When he finally broke through the jungle onto the beach, Elena was exactly where he'd left her, propped against the driftwood, her eyes closed. "Elena!" he called. Her eyes opened, focused, widened when she saw the water. "You didn't drink," she said. "You told me not to." "I know, but—" She stopped. Something like respect crossed her face. "You actually listened." Seemed smarter than dying. Daniel knelt beside her, handed her the metal bowl. Their fingers touched briefly, both shaking, both desperate. Elena brought the water to her lips and drank. Not all of it, just enough to wet her throat, to make swallowing possible again. Then she handed the bowl back to Daniel. "Your turn." The water tasted like salvation. They finished half the bowl between them, rationing the rest for later. Daniel wanted to drink it all, wanted to pour it over his head, wanted to bathe in it. But Elena's earlier words echoed, "Dying alone doesn't get you home to Sophie." When the water was secured, placed carefully in the shade of the driftwood, they sat in silence for a while. The sun had started its slow descent toward evening. The beach stretched empty in both directions. No boats, no planes, no evidence that anyone in the world knew they existed. "So," Elena said eventually, "what now?" Daniel had been thinking about that, about what came next, about how to survive long enough for rescue to matter. "Shelter," he said. "Fire, food, in that order." That's a lot of work for two people who can barely move." "Then we don't do it all today. We do what we can, one thing at a time." Elena studied him. "You're different than you were on the plane. The plane was 6 hours ago. Feels like 6 years. She shifted her injured leg, winced. "On the plane you had this look, like you were already somewhere else, thinking about meetings, deals, whatever billionaires think about. Now you're here. Hard not to be here when here is trying to kill me." Fair point. Elena looked at the jungle, the beach, the ocean. "You know what's weird? I spent my whole life poor, like skip meals to pay rent poor, work 3 jobs poor. And I always thought if I just had money, if I could just get to somewhere like Tokyo with a real job and a real paycheck, everything would be okay. Like money was the answer to every question. And now? Now I'm sitting on a beach with a billionaire and we're both equally screwed." She laughed. "Turns out money doesn't mean shit to the ocean." Daniel thought about his watch. Gone. His phone gone. His credit cards, his passwords, his entire digital life, all gone. Everything that had defined him for 32 years had dissolved in salt water. And what was left? Just a broken body and a desperate promise, and a woman who'd paid $300 for a middle seat. "I was supposed to close a merger tomorrow," he said. "Singapore. $800 million. My lawyers have been working on it for 6 months." "What happens if you don't close it?" "I don't know. Someone else closes it, probably. Or it falls apart, or—" He trailed off. "It doesn't matter. None of that matters here. But it matters to you." It did. Yesterday it was the most important thing in my world. Daniel picked up a handful of sand, let it sift through his fingers. "Today the most important thing is finding a way to keep us alive long enough to get home." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then, "Tell me about Sophie." The name hurt, like pressing on a bruise, but also like relief. Like someone finally asking about the thing that mattered most. "She's 7, Daniel said. "Loves purple, hates vegetables, draws constantly, people, animals, houses, whatever. She's got this imagination that just—" He gestured helplessly. "She sees the world like it's magic, like anything's possible if you just believe hard enough." "What happened to her mother?" "Cancer, 3 years ago. Ovarian. By the time they caught it, it was stage 4. Daniel's voice went flat. I threw everything at it. Best doctors, experimental treatments, clinical trials. Didn't matter. She died 6 months after diagnosis. I'm sorry. Me too. Daniel looked at the ocean. Sophie was 4, old enough to understand Mommy was gone, but not old enough to understand why. She kept asking when Mommy was coming home. I had to explain that Mommy wasn't coming home, that she was... He stopped. How do you explain death to a 4-year-old? I don't know, Elena said quietly. Neither did I. So I did it badly. Made promises I shouldn't have made. Told her Daddy would always be there. Daddy would never leave. Daddy always comes home. He laughed, bitter. Look how that turned out. You survived a plane crash. I'd say that counts as trying. Trying doesn't matter if I don't make it back. Elena was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I had a daughter. Daniel turned to look at her. She was staring at the ocean, her face carefully blank. Had? He asked carefully. Stillborn. 8 years ago. Labor complications. They said it was nobody's fault, just one of those things that happen sometimes. Her voice was steady, clinical, like she was reading from a medical report. Her name was Isabella. I held her for 2 hours. Then they took her away. Elena, don't. She held up a hand. Don't say you're sorry. Don't say it was tragic. Don't say any of the things people always say. I've heard them all. They don't help. Daniel closed his mouth, nodded. After Isabella died, her father left, Elena continued. Said he couldn't look at me without seeing what we'd lost. So I was alone. No baby, no partner, no money, because we'd blown everything on preparing for a child that never came home. She finally looked at Daniel. You want to know why I was on that plane? Why I was flying to Tokyo for a job interview? Why? Because I spent 8 years trying to rebuild a life that made sense. 8 years working shit jobs, saving every penny, learning Japanese at night, applying to every position I was remotely qualified for. And finally, someone said yes. A tech firm in Tokyo that needed a Spanish-English-Japanese translator. They offered me a contract, a work visa, a chance to start over somewhere nobody knew me as the woman whose baby died. You would have gotten it, Daniel said. Maybe, or maybe I would have fucked it up like I fuck everything else up. She shrugged. Doesn't matter now. Now I'm here with you, trying not to die on a beach nobody knows exists. They sat with that for a while. The sun kept sinking. Shadows stretched across the sand. Daniel's shoulder throbbed in time with his heartbeat. We're a mess, he said finally. Yeah, Elena agreed. We really are. But we're alive. For now. For now, Daniel repeated. Then, want to build a shelter before the sun sets, or should we just accept that we're going to freeze? Elena looked at the jungle, the beach, the rapidly approaching darkness. Shelter. Definitely shelter. But if you suggest rubbing sticks together again, I'm pushing you into the ocean. Deal. They started gathering materials, palm fronds for roofing, driftwood for framing, vines for binding. Elena directed from her position against the log, pointing out which pieces would work and which were useless. Daniel did the actual hauling, his one good arm doing triple duty, his broken collarbone screaming protest. It took 3 hours to build something that barely qualified as a shelter. More of a lean-to, really. A pile of wooden leaves propped against a rock, just large enough for 2 people to squeeze under if they didn't mind being pressed together like sardines. But it would keep the wind off. It would preserve body heat. It would give them somewhere to collapse when exhaustion finally won. Not bad, Elena said, examining their work as the last light faded. For 2 people who've never built anything more complicated than IKEA furniture. I haven't even built IKEA furniture, Daniel admitted. I had people for that too. Of course you did. But she was smiling. Just a little. Come on, let's get under this thing before we both pass out. They crawled into the shelter together. It was cramped and uncomfortable and full of poking branches. But it was theirs. They'd built it with broken bodies and stubborn refusal to quit. Outside, night fell like a curtain. The ocean whispered. The jungle hummed. Somewhere far above, stars emerged one by one, indifferent witnesses to 2 people who were still, against all odds, alive. Daniel closed his eyes, thought about Sophie, about her purple crayon and her absolute certainty. Daddy always comes home. He would, somehow, even if it killed him trying. Daniel woke to the sound of screaming, not human screaming, something else, high and sharp and utterly foreign. His eyes snapped open in the darkness of their makeshift shelter, his hand instinctively reaching for, what? His phone? A weapon? There was nothing. Just palm fronds above his head and Elena's warm body pressed against his side because the shelter was too damn small for personal space. "It's just birds," Elena muttered without opening her eyes. "They do that every morning." "You'll get used to it." "How long have you been awake?" "Long enough to count 17 different ways this day could kill us." She shifted, winced as her injured leg moved. Dehydration's still number one. Infection's a close second. Then there's starvation, exposure, whatever predators live in that jungle, and my personal favorite, going completely insane from being stuck on a beach with a billionaire who doesn't know how to open a coconut. I know how to open a coconut. Really? In theory? Elena snorted. That's what I thought. She pushed herself up on her elbows, carefully keeping weight off her bad leg. Come on, sun's coming up. We need water before the heat hits. They crawled out of the shelter into gray pre-dawn light. Daniel's whole body screamed protest. Muscles he didn't know he had were locked in tight knots. His shoulder was a solid mass of pain, and his head felt like someone had stuffed it with cotton and regret. Elena looked worse. Her makeshift bandage was crusted with dried blood. Her face was pale, and when she tried to stand, she immediately sat back down. Legs worse, she said flatly. Let me see. There's nothing to see except blood and damage. Unless you went to medical school between yesterday and today, looking won't help. I took a first aid course once. When? 7th grade. It was required for summer camp. Elena stared at him. You took one first aid course 25 years ago, and you think that qualifies you to... I'm not saying I can fix it. I'm saying I can look at it and maybe we'll have a better idea of how bad it is. They glared at each other across 3 feet of sand. The ocean whispered. The birds screamed. Finally, Elena sighed. Fine. Look. But don't touch unless you've got antibiotics and surgical thread hidden in your designer suit. Daniel crawled over to her, carefully unwrapped the blood-stiff fabric she'd torn from her shirt. The wound underneath made his stomach turn. A deep gash ran from mid-calf to ankle, ragged edges suggesting something had torn rather than cut. The flesh around it was swollen, hot to the touch, showing the angry red streaks that even Daniel's rusty first aid knowledge recognized as infection setting in. It's infected, he said. No shit. We need to clean it, keep it elevated. Change the bandage. With what? We don't have clean water, we don't have bandages, and elevation just means I lie here useless while you do all the work. Elena pulled her leg back, started rewrapping it with shaking hands. Forget it. We've got bigger problems. Your leg getting worse is a pretty big problem. My leg's already a disaster. Worrying about it doesn't change that. She tied off the bandage, too tight, making herself wince. What has changed things is getting more water. That metal bowl you found? It'll last us maybe another 6 hours in this heat. Then we're back to square one. She was right. Daniel hated that she was right, but the math was simple. They'd finished the last of yesterday's water before sleeping. The island sun was already starting to cook the air. Without water, they'd be dead before nightfall. I'll go back to the stream, he said. Not alone. You barely made it back yesterday. You can't walk. I can hop. I told you that. Elena, don't. She cut him off, her voice sharp. Don't do that thing where you try to protect me because I'm injured or because I'm a woman or because you think you're supposed to be the hero. I've been taking care of myself since I was 16. I don't need you deciding what I can and can't do. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, started again. I wasn't trying to... Yes, you were. You were absolutely trying to. She pushed herself upright, balancing on one leg with a palm tree for support. Look, I get it. You're used to being in charge, making decisions, having people follow your orders. But this isn't your boardroom, and I'm not your employee. We're partners in this, equal partners, which means we decide things together. Fine, Daniel said. Together. So let's decide together that you staying here while I get water makes more sense than both of us struggling through the jungle. And let's decide together that you passing out alone in the jungle and dying makes less sense than me coming with you to make sure that doesn't happen. They stared at each other. The sun kept rising. Heat was already building in the air like pressure in a sealed container. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" Daniel asked. "Not even a little bit. Even though it's a terrible idea?" "All our ideas are terrible. At least this one keeps us together." Daniel wanted to argue more, wanted to insist that he could handle it, that he'd made the trip once and could make it again. But looking at Elena's face, at the stubborn set of her jaw and the steel in her eyes, he recognized someone who'd spent a lifetime fighting for the right to make her own choices, even stupid ones. "Okay," he said, "together. But if your leg gives out, then I'll sit down and you'll keep going. Deal?" "Deal." It took them 2 hours to reach the stream, not because the distance was far. Daniel estimated maybe half a mile, but because every 10 feet, Elena had to stop. Rest. Breathe through the pain that was clearly turning her leg into molten agony. She never complained, never asked to turn back, just gritted her teeth and kept moving, using branches as makeshift crutches, her good leg doing all the work. Daniel walked beside her, carrying the metal bowl, trying not to hover. It was harder than he'd expected. Every time she stumbled, every time her face went white, every instinct screamed at him to help, to carry her, to do something. But he'd learned enough to know that Elena would rather crawl on her hands and knees than accept help she hadn't asked for. "You're staring," she said without looking at him. "I'm watching to make sure you don't fall." "Same thing." "It's really not." "Daniel." She stopped, balanced on one leg, turned to face him. Sweat poured down her face. Her bandage was bleeding through again, but her eyes were clear. "I know you mean well. I know you're trying to help. But the staring makes it worse. Makes me feel weak. And if I start feeling weak, I'll start being weak and then we're both screwed. So just look somewhere else. Please." Daniel looked at the jungle canopy, at the vines hanging like ropes, at anything except Elena's struggle. "Better?" he asked. "Better." They kept moving. The birds that had led Daniel yesterday were gone, but he remembered the path well enough. Uphill, trending right, following the sound of water that got louder with each step. When they finally reached the stream, Elena collapsed on the bank with a sound that was half groan, half sob. "I'm okay," she said immediately. "Just need a minute." Daniel filled the bowl without comment, brought it to her. She drank, handed it back, drank again. They finished half of it before the desperation eased enough to think clearly. "We can't keep doing this," Elena said. "Doing what?" "Hiking through the jungle twice a day for water. It's burning calories we don't have, destroying my leg further, and wasting time we should spend on fire and shelter and food." She gestured at the stream. "We need to bring the water to us. Or bring us to the water. Move our camp here? Maybe. Or find a way to carry more. Build containers, something." She looked around at the jungle. "There has to be plants we can use. Bamboo for pipes, large leaves for collection. I don't know. I'm not a survivalist. Neither am I." "No shit. You're a billionaire who probably hasn't carried his own groceries since college." "I carried groceries last month," Daniel protested. "From your car to your kitchen doesn't count. It was from the car to the elevator to the penthouse kitchen. That's at least 40 feet. Elena laughed despite herself. "My hero." They sat by the stream, drinking slowly, rationing what they could. Daniel's mind churned through possibilities. Moving camp made sense, except their current shelter was on the beach, where rescue planes might spot them. Building containers made sense, except neither of them knew how to work with bamboo or weave palm fronds into anything waterproof. Everything came back to the same problem. They were educated, intelligent adults who'd spent their lives in a world where survival meant knowing how to work a smartphone. "My dad would know what to do," Elena said quietly. "The fisherman?" "Yeah. He grew up poor in Puerto Rico, like no running water, poor. He knew how to catch fish with his hands, make rope from vines, find fresh water by watching birds. All the stuff they don't teach you in school because everyone assumes you'll just buy what you need." She picked up a smooth stone from the stream bed, turned it over in her hands. "I used to think he was embarrassing." All his stories about the old days, about making do with nothing. I wanted him to be modern, sophisticated, like the dads my friends had with their office jobs and their cars. Where's he now? Dead. Heart attack 5 years ago. She threw the stone into the water. Never got to tell him I was wrong, that all those skills I thought were useless? They're the only things that matter here. Daniel thought about his own father, Richard Cross, who'd built a tech empire from a college dorm room, who taught Daniel that problems were just opportunities disguised as obstacles, who died surrounded by lawyers making sure every asset was properly distributed. What would Richard Cross do on a deserted island? Probably die within 48 hours, Daniel thought. His father had been brilliant with code and terrible with everything physical, couldn't change a tire, couldn't cook a meal, couldn't survive without other people handling the messy details of existence. Like father, like son. We should get back, Elena said, before the heat gets worse. We just got here. And we got what we came for. Water. Staying longer just risks you passing out or me opening this leg wound more. She started pushing herself upright. Come on, let's... She stopped, stared at something past Daniel's shoulder. Her face went strange. What? Daniel turned, saw nothing but jungle and stream and rocks. What is it? There. Elena pointed with a shaking hand. Caught in those branches, do you see it? Daniel squinted, eventually spotted what she was pointing at, a scrap of fabric, bright blue, tangled in branches about 15 feet downstream. Nothing special, just cloth. Then his brain caught up with his eyes. That specific shade of blue, that pattern of white stripes. He'd seen it before, on the plane, on Marcus, the flight attendant who'd been trying to calm passengers when everything went to hell. It's from the plane, Daniel said. I know. Elena was already moving, hopping downstream on one leg, using branches for balance. There might be more. Supplies. A survival kit. Something. They reached the fabric together. Daniel pulled it free from the branches, definitely part of Marcus's uniform shirt, torn and water-stained but unmistakable, and underneath it, wedged between two rocks, half submerged in the stream, a small orange case with white lettering. Emergency survival kit. Daniel's hand shook as he pulled it free. The case was sealed, waterproof, about the size of a lunchbox. He popped the latches. Inside, matches in a waterproof container, an emergency blanket, a basic first aid kit, water purification tablets, a small knife, fishing line with hooks, and a flare gun with 3 flares. Oh my God, Elena breathed. Oh my God, we're not going to die. We were always going to. Shut up. We're not going to die. Not today anyway. She grabbed the first aid kit, started going through it with shaking hands. Bandages, antiseptic, antibacterial ointment. This is... Daniel, this changes everything. She was right. The matches alone meant fire. Real fire, not the hypothetical friction-based fire they'd been failing to create. Fire meant boiled water, cooked food, signals, warmth. The knife meant cutting tools. The fishing line meant protein. The flares meant rescue was actually possible instead of just a desperate hope. Marcus must have grabbed it when the plane started going down, Daniel said. Tried to bring it with him when he evacuated. Where do you think he ended up? Daniel didn't answer. Didn't want to think about Marcus or the other 19 passengers, or the fact that this survival kit floating downstream meant its owner hadn't survived to use it. The ocean had taken them all, everyone except the 2 people who'd gotten incredibly, impossibly lucky. Let's get this back to camp, Elena said. Clean my leg before it gets worse. Make fire before sunset. Maybe catch some fish if we're smart about it. We don't know how to fish. We'll figure it out. We figured everything else out so far. She looked at Daniel, and for the first time since the crash, something like hope flickered in her eyes. We're going to make it. You know that, right? With these supplies, with what we've learned, we're actually going to survive this. Daniel wanted to believe her, wanted to feel the same hope. But looking at her infected leg, at the endless jungle, at the isolation that stretched in every direction, all he could think was surviving the crash was the easy part. The return trip took 3 hours. Elena's leg was worse. Daniel could see that even without looking directly at her. She moved slower, stopped more often, made sounds she tried to muffle, but couldn't quite hide. By the time they stumbled back onto the beach, the sun was directly overhead, and Elena's face was the color of old paper. Sit, Daniel commanded. For once, she didn't argue, just collapsed in the shade of their shelter, her bad legs stretched out, her breathing too fast. Daniel went to work with the first aid kit, carefully unwrapped her bandage, trying not to wince at what he found underneath. The infection had spread. Red streaks reached halfway up her calf now, the flesh hot and swollen. He cleaned it with antiseptic. Elena bit down on a piece of driftwood to keep from screaming, then applied antibacterial ointment and fresh bandages from the kit. Better? He asked when he finished. Elena spat out the driftwood. Define better. Less likely to kill you. Then sure, better. She closed her eyes. Wake me up when you've built a 5-star resort. Daniel let her sleep, took the matches and started gathering wood, dry this time, selected carefully, nothing that would produce smoke without flame. He built a small fire pit away from their shelter, arranged tinder and kindling the way he vaguely remembered from a camping trip 20 years ago, and struck a match. The flame caught immediately, spread, grew. Within 5 minutes, Daniel had real fire crackling in front of him. He stared at it for a long time. This simple thing that humans had been making for hundreds of thousands of years. This basic tool that separated civilization from wilderness. And he'd needed a survival kit to achieve it. Pretty, Elena said from the shelter. Daniel turned. She was awake, watching him with half-lidded eyes. I made fire, he said. I can see that. Without your help. Congratulations. Want a medal? Maybe a little credit? You get credit when you use that fire to boil water or cook food or do something besides stare at it like you invented combustion. But she was smiling. Although I'll admit, it's nice to know we won't freeze tonight. Daniel added more wood to the fire, filled the metal bowl with stream water and balanced it on rocks above the flames. They had purification tablets in the survival kit, but boiling would help too. Extra insurance against the diseases that were probably already trying to colonize their damaged bodies. While the water boiled, Daniel examined the fishing line and hooks. He'd never fished in his life, never had reason to. In his world, fish came in neat portions on white plates, prepared by chefs who made 6 figures. The idea of catching one himself seemed as foreign as building a spaceship, but the ocean was right there, full of fish, and they were going to starve if they didn't figure this out. You need bait, Elena called from the shelter. What kind? Anything small that moves. Worms, insects, small crabs. Check the tide pools. Daniel walked to where ocean met rock, found pools of water left by the receding tide. Small crabs scuttled in the shallows. He caught 3 after multiple failed attempts, feeling stupid and slow and utterly out of his element. But when he baited the hook with pieces of crab meat and cast the line into deeper water, something primal stirred in his chest. This was survival. Real, basic, human survival. An hour later, he'd caught nothing. 2 hours later, his back hurt from sitting on rocks. 3 hours later, Elena hobbled over to check on him. Any luck? Define luck. Fish, plural. Then no. Elena sat down beside him, her bad legs stretched out awkwardly. She examined his setup, the line, the hook, the bait. You're fishing in the wrong spot, she said. How can it be the wrong spot? There's ocean everywhere. Fish don't hang out in open water during the day. Too much sun, too many predators. They hide in structures, under rocks, near coral, in shadows. She pointed to a cluster of rocks about 30 feet down the beach. Try there. Daniel moved, recast his line. Within 10 minutes, the line jerked. Pull, Elena shouted. Daniel pulled, fought the line as something fought back. His broken collarbone screamed, but he didn't stop, didn't let go, kept pulling until a fish broke the surface. Small, silver, absolutely beautiful. He'd never been so proud of anything in his life. That night they ate grilled fish and boiled water and sat by a fire that pushed back the darkness. Elena's leg was still infected, Daniel's shoulder was still broken, and they were still stranded on an island with no guarantee of rescue. But for the first time since the crash, survival felt possible. Not easy, not certain, but possible. Tell me about your company, Elena said suddenly. Daniel looked at her across the fire. Why? Because we've been talking about survival and death and injuries for 2 days, and I'd like to talk about something else. Something normal. She adjusted her bandaged leg. So tell me, What's it like running a tech empire? It's not an empire. Forbes said, Forbes says a lot of things, most of them exaggerated. Daniel poked at the fire with a stick. I built a software platform, something that helps businesses manage data more efficiently. It's boring, it's technical, and it's profitable. That's it. That's not it. You don't get on the cover of Forbes for building boring software. Fine. It's boring software that disrupted a $100 billion industry, pissed off every major competitor, and made me very wealthy very fast. He shrugged. Happy? Not really. I wanted a story. That's just facts. Daniel thought about it, about how to explain the early days, the desperation, the certainty that he was on to something even when everyone said he was crazy. I started in my apartment, he said finally. Tiny place in San Francisco, 1 bedroom, probably 500 square feet. Sophie was 2. Sarah, my wife, was sick, but we didn't know how sick yet. I was working 18-hour days trying to build something that would support us, something that would matter. Why software? Because it was the only thing I was good at. Couldn't fix a car, couldn't build furniture, couldn't do any of the practical things my dad could do, but I could write code, could see patterns in data that other people missed, could build systems that just worked. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then, what happened when it took off? Everything changed. Money, status, attention. Suddenly everyone wanted meetings, wanted partnerships, wanted a piece of what I'd built. Sarah hated it. She wanted the guy who coded in our apartment, not the guy who flew to Singapore for merger talks. He paused. She died before it got really big. Maybe that was a mercy. She didn't have to watch me turn into my father. You're not your father. How would you know? You've known me for 2 days. Because your father wouldn't have pulled me up on the plane, wouldn't have shared his water, wouldn't have cleaned my infected leg or learned to fish just to keep us fed. Elena met his eyes across the fire. Your father would have died on day 1 because he never learned to need other people. Daniel wanted to argue, but she was probably right. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire burn down to embers. The ocean whispered. The jungle hummed. Above them, stars wheeled in patterns Daniel had never noticed in the light-polluted skies of his normal life. I'm scared, Elena said quietly. Of what? That we won't get rescued, that my leg will get worse and I'll die of infection, that you'll get fever from your concussion and stop making sense, that we'll run out of luck. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wincing as the movement pulled at her injury. I've been scared before. After Isabella died, I was scared I'd never feel normal again. After her father left, I was scared I'd be alone forever. But this is different. This is immediate. Real. We'll get rescued, Daniel said. You don't know that. No, but I know we survived a plane crash, made it to shore, found water and food and fire. We've beaten impossible odds twice already. We can do it again. Elena looked at him. You really believe that? I have to, because the alternative is giving up, and I can't do that. Sophie's waiting, and I promised. Daddy always comes home, Elena murmured. Exactly. What if... She stopped, started again. What if we don't get rescued in time? What if it takes months, years? What if... Then we survive anyway, Daniel cut her off. We learn, we adapt, we figure it out, because that's what humans do. We're survivors, Elena, both of us. We've already proven that. She was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded slowly. Okay, she said. We survive. We survive. They shook hands across the dying fire, their grips firm despite exhaustion and injury and fear. Partners. Equals. 2 people who'd started from opposite ends of the wealth spectrum and ended up exactly the same, desperate, determined, and alive. The next 3 days blurred together in a rhythm of survival. Wake at dawn to bird screams. Check Elena's leg, still infected, but not spreading. Boil water. Eat whatever fish Daniel had caught the previous evening. Gather firewood. Improve their shelter with palm fronds and driftwood and increasingly sophisticated engineering. Elena couldn't help with the physical work, but her mind was sharp. She directed, advised, caught Daniel's mistakes before they became disasters. When he wanted to build the shelter higher, She pointed out that height meant instability and wind. When he wanted to move their fire pit closer, she reminded him that sparks plus palm fronds equaled disaster. When he caught a fish with bright orange spots, she told him to throw it back because color meant poison. "How do you know these things?" Daniel asked on day 4. "I don't. I'm guessing based on what my dad told me and what makes logical sense." She watched him gut a fish with the survival kit knife, her face showing a mix of disgust and approval. "You're getting better at that. With practice. Or desperation. Both." They were starting to understand each other's rhythms. Daniel learned that Elena was sharpest in the morning, before pain and heat exhausted her. Elena learned that Daniel worked better with direction than freedom, needed structure to prevent his mind from spiraling into anxiety. Together, they were building something that looked almost like competence. But competence didn't solve the fundamental problem. They were still alone. No planes had flown overhead. No ships had appeared on the horizon. The flare guns sat unused in their shelter because wasting a flare on empty ocean seemed worse than saving it for a rescue that might never come. On the 5th night, Elena's fever spiked. Daniel woke to find her shaking violently, her skin burning, her eyes unfocused. The infection had finally broken through whatever barriers her immune system had maintained. Now it was flooding her bloodstream with poison. "Elena," he said, gripping her shoulders. "Elena, stay with me." "Cold," she muttered. "So cold." She was on fire. Daniel pressed his hand to her forehead and felt heat that had nothing to do with the tropical air. He grabbed the emergency blanket from the survival kit, wrapped her in it, added wood to the fire until it roared. None of it helped. Elena just shook harder, her teeth chattering, her body fighting a war it was losing. "Don't," Daniel said. Not to her. To the universe, to whatever forces had crashed their plane and killed everyone else and left them stranded on this beach. "Don't you dare take her now, not after everything." But the universe didn't care about his demands. Never had. The fever climbed higher. Daniel did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed the first aid kit antibiotics, just a few pills, barely enough for a minor infection, and forced them down Elena's throat with water. Then he lay down beside her, pulled her against his chest, and tried to will his own body heat into something helpful. "You're going to be okay," he whispered into her hair. "You have to be okay. Because I can't do this alone. I need you. Sophie needs you. You're the only reason we've made it this far." Elena didn't respond, just shook and burned and fought. Daniel held her through the night, fed the fire, pressed cool water to her lips. And sometime before dawn, when exhaustion finally dragged him under, his last thought was a prayer to nobody in particular. "Please don't let me wake up alone." Daniel woke to silence. Not the comfortable silence of sleep, but the terrible absence of sound that comes when something vital has stopped. His eyes snapped open. Elena wasn't shaking anymore, wasn't moving at all. For one heart-stopping moment, he thought she was dead. Then she coughed, weak but alive. "Water?" she rasped. Daniel nearly sobbed with relief. He grabbed the metal bowl, helped her sit up enough to drink. Her fever had broken sometime in the night. She was still warm, still sick, but the killing heat was gone. "How long?" she asked. "All night. You were—" Daniel stopped. Couldn't quite say what she'd been. "Bad. Really bad. Feel like hell. You look like it too." She managed a weak smile. "Always honest. Someone has to be." Elena drank more water, then lay back down with a groan. Her bandage was soaked through again. The infection wasn't done with her yet, just taking a break between rounds. Daniel knew without checking that they were running out of antibiotics, out of time, out of the medical supplies that stood between Elena and a death that would come slow and agonizing. "We need real help," he said. "No shit." "I'm serious. The antibiotics won't last. Your leg needs proper treatment, surgery probably, IV antibiotics, things we can't do here." Elena stared at the shelter's palm frond ceiling. "Then we better hope someone finds us soon." "Hope's not a strategy. It's all we've got." Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to insist there had to be something more they could do, some plan they could execute, some cross-family solution that would fix everything through sheer force of will and resources. But his resources were at the bottom of the Pacific, and willpower couldn't cure sepsis. "The flares," he said suddenly. "What about them?" "We've been saving them, waiting for the perfect moment when we see a plane or a ship. But what if that moment doesn't come? What if we wait too long and you die before we get a chance to use them?" Elena turned her head to look at him. "You want to shoot off a flare into empty sky?" "I want to shoot off a flare every night at sunset when visibility's best. 3 nights, 3 flares. Maximum chance someone sees it. And if nobody does, then we've wasted our only signal. We're wasting it anyway if you're dead when rescue arrives." They locked eyes. Elena's were still fever bright, but her mind was working behind them, calculating, weighing survival against hope, against the slow arithmetic of death. "Okay," she said finally. "Tonight, at sunset, we try." Daniel spent the day preparing like his life depended on it. Because it did. Because Elena's did. He gathered every piece of dry wood he could find, built the signal fire higher than he'd dared before, spelled out SOS in rocks on the beach, each letter 10 feet tall, arranged reflective pieces of plane debris to catch light, did everything he could think of to make them visible from the air or sea. Elena watched from the shelter, too weak to help but sharp enough to direct. "Move that rock. Make the S bigger. Add more driftwood to the pile. No, the dry pieces, not the wet ones." "Yes, ma'am." "Don't ma'am me. I'm 30, not 80. "You're bossy enough for 80. "Someone has to be, since you clearly can't organize a beach signal without supervision." They fell into the banter easily now. It helped. Gave them something to focus on besides fear and infection and the growing likelihood that they'd die here without anyone knowing what happened to them. By sunset, everything was ready. Daniel loaded the flare gun with shaking hands. The first flare. The first real attempt at rescue beyond just surviving and hoping. He pointed it at the sky, finger on the trigger. "Wait," Elena said. "What if—" "Don't!" Daniel cut her off. "Don't second-guess this. We decided. We commit. I was just going to say, what if you angle it more toward the horizon? Flare's arc. If you shoot straight up, it'll be visible for less time. Angle it 45 degrees, it'll travel farther." Daniel adjusted his aim. "Better?" "Better." He pulled the trigger. The flare erupted with a sound like a small cannon, shooting into the darkening sky on a tail of fire. It arced over the ocean, brilliant red against the purple sunset, hanging in the air for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then it guttered out and fell into the sea. They waited, watched, hoped. Nothing happened. No answering flare, no distant engine sound, no lights appearing on the horizon. Just the same empty ocean and the same indifferent sky. "Tomorrow," Elena said quietly. "We try again tomorrow." Daniel nodded. Couldn't trust himself to speak. He'd known logically that one flare probably wouldn't bring immediate rescue, but some stupid part of his brain had believed anyway. Had thought maybe, just maybe, the universe owed them one break after everything they'd endured. The universe disagreed. That night, Elena's fever came back. Not as bad as before, but bad enough. She shivered in the emergency blanket while Daniel fed the fire and pressed water to her lips and tried not to think about what would happen when the antibiotics ran out. They had maybe 2 days' worth left. After that, Elena's immune system would be fighting alone against an infection that had already proven too strong. "Tell me about Sophie," Elena said through chattering teeth. "What do you want to know?" "Anything, everything. I need to think about something besides dying." So Daniel told her. About Sophie's first word. No, naturally. About how she insisted on wearing her purple dress every single day for 6 months straight until it literally fell apart. About the time she tried to adopt a pigeon from the park and cried for 3 hours when Daniel explained they couldn't bring it home. About her drawings that covered every surface of their apartment, her questions that never stopped, her absolute certainty that the world was good and people were kind and Daddy would always protect her. "She sounds perfect," Elena murmured. "She's a nightmare sometimes, throws tantrums over vegetables, refuses to sleep, has opinions about everything." Daniel smiled despite everything. "But yeah, she's perfect. You're going to see her again. We're both going to make it home." "Daniel, no, We're both making it. I'm not leaving you here. Elena was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was so soft Daniel almost missed it. If I don't make it, you have to promise me something. You're going to make it. Promise me anyway. Promise you'll tell Sophie about me. Not the dying part, the other parts. The fishing, and the fire, the fighting. Promise she'll know that her dad didn't survive alone. Elena, promise. Daniel's throat closed up. He managed to nod. Out loud, Elena insisted. Say it. I promise, he whispered. But you're going to tell her yourself because you're not dying here. We'll see. She fell asleep, still shivering. Daniel stayed awake, feeding the fire, watching her breathe, counting each rise and fall of her chest like counting money. Proof of wealth, evidence of survival. The only currency that mattered. Somewhere around midnight, it started to rain. Not the gentle tropical rain that cooled and refreshed. This was the other kind. The kind that came with wind that threatened to tear their shelter apart, and waves that crashed higher on the beach, and thunder that sounded like the sky breaking. Daniel grabbed Elena and pulled her deeper under their inadequate palm frond roof, but water found every gap, every weakness. Within minutes, they were soaked. The fire! Elena shouted over the wind. Daniel looked. Their signal fire, the one he'd spent all day building, was already drowning. Smoke poured from the wet wood, but flames were dying, being beaten down by rain that came sideways and relentless. He tried to cover it with the emergency blanket, but wind ripped the blanket from his hands and sent it tumbling down the beach. Forget it! Elena grabbed his arm. Get back here before you get hit by debris. Daniel stumbled back to the shelter just as a coconut smashed into the sand where he'd been standing. The storm was getting worse. Palm trees bent nearly horizontal. Their shelter supports groaned. In the lightning flashes, Daniel could see waves reaching far higher than they had any right to, eating the beach in hungry gulps. We need to move inland, he shouted. We can't! My leg! I'll carry you. You can barely walk yourself. Then we'll crawl, but we can't stay here. Another wave crashed, this one close enough to spray them with salt water. The ocean was coming for them, reclaiming the beach, erasing their signal, their shelter, their desperate attempts at survival. Daniel didn't wait for Elena to argue more. He grabbed her under the arms and started dragging her toward higher ground. She screamed, pain from her leg, shock from the movement, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The ocean was right behind them, each wave reaching farther. They made it maybe 50 feet before Daniel's strength gave out. His shoulder was fire. His head was spinning. His body was shutting down, overwhelmed by injury and exhaustion and the simple impossibility of moving another inch. Leave me, Elena gasped. No. Daniel, you can't. I said no. He tried to lift her again, failed, tried again. His vision grayed at the edges. The storm howled. Lightning struck something in the jungle, close enough that Daniel could smell ozone and burning wood. This was it. This was how they died. Not from the crash, not from infection or dehydration or starvation, from a storm that would wash them into the ocean and scatter their bodies across the Pacific like the 20 other passengers who died on day one. Sophie would never know what happened to her father, would spend her life wondering if he'd suffered, if he'd thought of her, if he'd tried to come home. I'm sorry, Daniel whispered. To Sophie, to Elena, to everyone he'd failed. Then Elena's hand found his, gripped hard. Get up, she said. I can't. You can. We both can. Her voice was steel wrapped in pain. We've survived worse than rain, remember? We survived a plane explosion, survived the ocean, survived infection and concussions, and learning to fish with our bare hands. This is just water. We don't get to quit because of water. Elena? Daniel Cross, billionaire, father, survivor. She pulled herself into a sitting position using his arm as leverage, her face twisted in agony but her eyes clear. You told me we were partners, equals. So act like it. We move together or we die together, but we don't give up. Not ever. You said that yourself. She was right. He had said that. On the beach after their first day, when everything seemed impossible and survival seemed like a joke, they'd promised each other, not alone, not ever. Daniel found strength he didn't know he had, pushed himself upright, got his good arm under Elena's shoulders. She got her good leg under her. Together, broken and bleeding and absolutely refusing to quit, they crawled farther inland. The jungle swallowed them. Branches whipped their faces. Mud sucked at their bodies. Thunder crashed so close Daniel's ears rang, but they kept moving, hand over hand, inch by inch. Two people who should have been dead days ago, fighting like drowning was an insult instead of an inevitability. They found shelter under a massive tree whose roots formed a natural cave. Not comfortable, not dry, but above the waterline, protected from the worst of the wind. They collapsed together in the mud, too exhausted to speak. The storm raged all night. Daniel held Elena, and Elena held Daniel, and they breathed together and shook together and survived together. When lightning lit the world, Daniel could see debris flying past their shelter, palm fronds, pieces of wood, what might have been their signal fire scattered into nothing. Everything they'd built was gone. The shelter, the fire, the SOS spelled in rocks. All of it erased by water and wind, and the casual cruelty of weather that didn't care about their desperate attempts at civilization. "We're back to nothing," Elena said when the storm finally started to ease. "We have each other. That's not nothing, but it's not enough." "It's going to have to be." Dawn came gray and exhausted. The storm had moved on, leaving behind a beach Daniel barely recognized. The waterline had advanced by 20 feet. Their shelter was gone, just some scattered sticks where it used to stand. The careful signal they'd built was destroyed. Even the survival kit was missing, probably washed out to sea. Daniel and Elena sat under their tree and looked at the devastation in silence. "We need to search for the kit," Elena said finally. "Without those supplies, I know. And rebuild the signal and find food because we lost everything we'd stored. And..." She stopped, laughed, high and broken. "We're never getting off this island, are we?" "We will." "How? We lost the flares, lost the knife, lost everything that gave us a chance." She turned to look at Daniel, and her eyes were hollow. "This is it. This is where we die. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. My leg's infected, your shoulder's broken, we're out of antibiotics, and the universe just spent 12 hours proving that it doesn't care if we survive." "Elena." "I'm tired, Daniel. So tired. Tired of hurting, tired of fighting, tired of pretending we can actually win this." Tears started running down her face, mixing with rain and mud. "I want my daughter. I want my dad. I want to wake up in my shitty apartment and eat shitty cereal and go to my shitty job and live my shitty life because at least it was mine. At least I wasn't dying on a beach 1,000 miles from anyone who'd care." Daniel had no answer for that. No inspiring speech about survival or hope or fighting back. Because she was right. They were dying, slowly, painfully, inevitably. The math was simple and brutal. He reached out and pulled Elena against his chest. Let her cry. Let her shake. Let her be weak for the first time since the crash, because sometimes strength meant knowing when to break. "I care," he said quietly. "What?" "You said no one would care. I care. You die. It matters. To me. To Sophie when I tell her about you. To everyone whose life you touch after we get rescued. We're not getting rescued? Maybe not, but we're not giving up either." Daniel pulled back to look at her. "You told me last night we don't quit because of water. Well, I'm telling you now, we don't quit because of a storm. We've lost supplies before and found new ones, lost shelter before and rebuilt. This isn't different except in scale. It's impossible. So was surviving the crash. So was finding water. So was catching fish." He stood up, every muscle screaming protest, held out his hand. "Come on, let's see what's left." Elena stared at his hand for a long moment. Then she took it. They searched the beach for hours, found pieces of their old life scattered like puzzle pieces. The metal bowl caught in rocks, one fishing hook tangled in seaweed, a few sodden matches that would never light again. The survival kit was gone. The flares were gone. The emergency blanket was gone. But then Elena shouted from near the waterline. Daniel ran over. She was holding something orange. The survival kit. Beaten to hell, half buried in sand but intact. The waterproof seal had held. Inside, everything was still there. Matches, knife, the remaining antibiotics, 2 flares instead of 3, but 2 was infinitely better than 0. "We're not done yet," Elena said, and something like fire was back in her eyes. They spent the rest of the day rebuilding. The new shelter was cruder than the first, built in the jungle instead of on the beach for protection from storms. The new signal fire was smaller, but positioned on high ground where it could be seen from farther away. They had no energy for elaborate SOS signals, so Daniel just gathered reflective debris and piled it in a cairn that might catch sunlight. It wasn't much, but it was something. Evidence that they were still trying, still fighting. That night, they shot the second flare. Daniel angled it toward the horizon like Elena had taught him. Watched it arc into the darkness. Watched it burn brilliant red against the stars. Watched it die. No response. No rescue. Just the same empty ocean. "One flare left," Elena said. "We'll make it count." "How?" "I don't know yet, but we will." They sat by their new fire, eating fish that Daniel had somehow caught despite exhaustion and despair. Elena's fever was back, but lower than before, like her body was learning to fight. Her leg was still infected, but not spreading as fast. The antibiotics were helping, barely, just enough. "I've been thinking," Elena said. "About?" "About what we do if rescue doesn't come. If we're here for months, years." "We survive." "No, I mean really survive. Not just day to day, but long term. We'd need more than fish and fire. We'd need agriculture, preserved food for storms, better shelter, tools." She poked at the fire. "We'd need to build a life, not just avoid death." Daniel looked at her. "You're thinking past rescue." "I'm thinking past tomorrow, which is more than I could do 3 days ago, when I thought I'd be dead by now." She met his eyes. "What if this is it? What if this island is home now? Could you live with that?" Daniel thought about Sophie, about his promise, about everything waiting for him back in the world that had planes and hospitals and people who fixed things. Then he thought about what Elena was really asking. Could he survive if hope failed? Could he build something meaningful even in failure? "I don't know," he said honestly. "Ask me again in 6 months, when we've either been rescued or accepted that we won't be." "Fair." They sat in silence. Above them, stars wheeled through patterns that had guided sailors for thousands of years. Below them, the ocean whispered secrets in a language neither of them spoke. Daniel's mind drifted to the merger he'd missed, the contracts unsigned, the empire he'd built that was probably crumbling without him. Strange how little it mattered now. Strange how $100 billion meant nothing when you couldn't buy food or water or rescue. "Do you regret it?" Elena asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "Your life. Before. All the money and success and building an empire. Do you wish you'd done something different?" Daniel considered. "I regret not spending more time with Sophie. Regret working weekends when I could have been home. Regret thinking money could solve every problem when it couldn't even solve the important ones." He paused. "But I don't regret building something, creating something that mattered, even if it all fell apart the moment I wasn't there to hold it together." "It probably didn't fall apart." "Probably not. Someone stepped in, took over. The company will be fine." He smiled without humor. "I'm replaceable. Most people are." "Not to Sophie." "No, not to her." Daniel looked at Elena. "What about you? Regrets?" "Thousands. But mostly I regret all the time I spent being angry. Angry at Isabella's father for leaving. Angry at myself for not being enough. Angry at the world for being unfair." She shrugged. "Anger's exhausting. And for what? It didn't bring Isabella back. Didn't make me happy. Just made me bitter." "You're not bitter now." "No, now I'm just tired." But she was smiling slightly. "Tired and alive, which is better than bitter and dead." They talked until the fire burned low. About regrets and choices and the strange paths that had led them both onto the same doomed flight. About Sophie's purple crayons and Isabella's brief existence, and the people they'd been before the crash erased everything except survival. When Elena finally fell asleep, her head on Daniel's shoulder, he stayed awake a while longer, watching the embers, listening to the ocean, thinking about tomorrow. They had 1 flare left, 1 chance at rescue. After that, they'd need to decide. Keep hoping or start building a life in exile. Daniel didn't know which option scared him more. But as Elena's breathing evened out beside him, as her fever heat pressed against his side, as the jungle hummed its endless song around them, he realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. He wasn't alone. Whatever came next, rescue or exile, survival or death, he wouldn't face it alone. They'd face it together. Partners. Equals. Two people from different worlds who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and somehow made it work. The storm had taken almost everything, but it hadn't taken that. Daniel closed his eyes and let exhaustion pull him under. Elena's steady breathing, his last conscious thought before sleep claimed him. Tomorrow, they'd shoot the last flare. Tomorrow, they'd find out if hope was justified or just another way to break your own heart. But tonight, they had fire and food and each other. Tonight, that was enough. Morning came with a sound Daniel had almost forgotten existed. A bird. Not the usual screaming parrots or whatever the hell made noise every dawn. This was different, mechanical, rhythmic. He was half awake, still tangled with Elena under their crude shelter, when his brain finally processed what he was hearing. A helicopter. His eyes shot open. Elena, wake up. What? She was groggy, her fever having finally broken completely sometime in the night. Listen. They both went silent. The sound was distant but unmistakable, rotors chopping air, getting closer. The flare, Elena said. We need... Daniel was already moving. He grabbed the flare gun from where they'd secured it in the survival kit, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. The last flare. Their last chance. If this didn't work, if the helicopter passed by without seeing them, they were done hoping. Wait, Elena called. She was trying to stand using a branch as a crutch. Wait until it's closer. Make sure they can see it. Every instinct screamed at Daniel to shoot now, immediately, before the helicopter disappeared. But Elena was right, had been right about most things since the crash. He forced himself to wait, tracking the sound as it grew louder, closer. The helicopter was searching a grid pattern, he realized, moving methodically across the ocean, looking for survivors. Now, Elena said. Now, Daniel. He pointed the flare gun at the sky and pulled the trigger. The flare erupted in a streak of brilliant red, arcing over the jungle canopy, impossible to miss. Daniel watched it climb, his heart hammering, his entire body vibrating with hope and terror. The helicopter sound changed, shifted direction. They saw it, Elena breathed. Oh my God, they saw it. The helicopter appeared over the tree line 30 seconds later, massive, white with red crosses. A Coast Guard rescue bird that looked like Salvation with rotors. It circled once, twice, then started descending toward the beach. Daniel and Elena stumbled out of the jungle toward open sand, waving their arms, screaming words that got lost in rotor wash. The helicopter landed 50 yards away. Two figures in orange jumpsuits emerged, running toward them with equipment. We've got survivors! One shouted into his radio. 2 survivors. Both mobile, visible injuries. Then the man got close enough to actually see them, and his expression changed. Jesus, okay, we need medical immediately. Frank, get the stretcher. Daniel wanted to protest that they could walk, that they'd been walking for days, that they didn't need a stretcher. But the moment he tried to move toward the helicopter, his legs gave out, just stopped working. He went down hard in the sand. Strong hands caught him. Easy, buddy. We've got you. How long have you been out here? 6 days, Daniel managed. Maybe 7, lost count. Anyone else with you? Just her. He pointed at Elena, who was already being loaded onto a stretcher by the other rescuer, her infected leg finally getting the attention it had needed for days. She needs antibiotics, surgery probably. The infection, we'll take care of her. We'll take care of both of you. The rescuer, his name tag said Morrison, was doing a quick examination, checking pupils, pulse, obvious injuries. You've got a broken collarbone, concussion, severe dehydration. How the hell are you even conscious? Had to be, Daniel said. Sophie's waiting. Who's Sophie? My daughter. I promised I'd come home. Morrison's expression softened. Then let's get you home. They loaded Daniel onto the second stretcher. He tried to stay awake, to watch as they lifted him into the helicopter, to keep Elena in sight because some irrational part of his brain was convinced that if he lost sight of her now, she'd disappear. But exhaustion and relief and the simple fact that he didn't have to fight anymore pulled him under. His last conscious thought was, "We made it." Daniel woke in a hospital bed to the sound of machines beeping and Sophie crying. Not sad crying, happy crying. The kind of sobbing that came from relief so profound it had nowhere else to go. She was pressed against his chest, her small body shaking, her words tumbling out too fast to understand. "Daddy, you came home. You promised you always come home, and they said the plane crashed and everyone was dead. But I knew you weren't dead because you promised, and Grandma said I had to be brave. But I didn't want to be brave. I just wanted you, and you're here? You're really here? Hey." Daniel's voice came out scratchy, his throat raw. He wrapped his good arm around her, pulled her closer. "Hey, Bug. I'm here. I'm okay." "You're not okay. You're in the hospital." "Okay is relative." Sophie pulled back to look at him, her face blotchy and tear-streaked and absolutely beautiful. "What's relative mean?" "Means compared to being dead, I'm doing great." "That's not funny." "Little bit funny." She hit his chest, careful to avoid the IV lines and monitors. "You were gone forever 11 days. Do you know how long 11 days is when your dad's maybe dead?" 11 days. Daniel did the math. 6 days on the island, plus time for search and rescue, plus however long he'd been unconscious in the hospital. Nearly 2 weeks since the crash. "Where's Elena?" he asked. Sophie's face scrunched in confusion. "Who's Elena?" "The woman who was with me on the island. They brought us in together." Panic started rising. "Is she okay? Did she make it? Her leg was infected." "I don't know about any Elena." Sophie looked toward the door. "Grandma, Daddy's awake and asking about someone named Elena." Daniel's mother appeared in the doorway, looking older than he remembered. The crash had aged her, or maybe he'd just never noticed before. "Daniel, thank God." She crossed the room, kissed his forehead. Everyone thought, Mom, the woman who was with me, Elena Ruiz. "Where is she?" His mother's expression went carefully neutral. "She's in the ICU. Septic infection. They had to amputate part of her leg to stop it from spreading." The words hit like a physical blow. Amputate. Elena had lost her leg. The injury they'd fought so hard to manage, the infection she'd survived despite impossible odds, had taken her leg anyway. "I need to see her," Daniel said. "You need to rest. The doctor said—" "I don't care what the doctor said. I need to see her now." His mother and Sophie exchanged glances. Finally, his mother nodded. "I'll ask the nurse. But Daniel, she's heavily sedated. She might not even know you're there." "I'll know I'm there. That's what matters." They brought him to Elena's room in a wheelchair because standing was apparently still beyond him. Sophie insisted on coming, holding his hand the whole way. His mother walked beside them, worry etched into every line of her face. Elena's room was smaller than his, packed with more machines. She lay unconscious, her skin gray, her body diminished by fever and surgery. Her left leg ended mid-calf now, wrapped in bandages that were already seeping. Daniel wheeled himself to her bedside, took her hand. "Hey," he said quietly. "We made it. You were right. Someone found us." Elena didn't respond, didn't even twitch. The machines beeped their mechanical reassurance that she was alive, but alive was a long way from okay. "Who is she?" Sophie whispered. "The person who saved my life," Daniel said. "Multiple times. We survived together." "Is she going to be okay?" "I don't know, Bug. I hope so." A doctor appeared in the doorway, young, exhausted, holding a tablet. "Mr. Cross, you shouldn't be out of bed." "How is she?" The doctor glanced at Elena, then back at Daniel. "Honestly, it's touch and go. The infection did a lot of damage. We're fighting sepsis, organ stress, severe malnutrition. The amputation was necessary to save her life, but she's not out of danger yet." "What are her chances?" 60%. "Maybe better if she fights. From what the rescue team said, she's a fighter." "She is," Daniel confirmed. "She doesn't know how to quit." The doctor nodded. "Good. She's going to need that." He paused. "Can I ask you something, off the record?" "Sure." "The survival kit you had, the matches, the knife, the flares. Where did you find it?" "Downstream from our camp, caught in some branches." That kit saved your lives. The rescue helicopter was on its last search grid when they saw your flare. They were about to turn back, call off the search. Another hour, and they would have missed you. Daniel's hand tightened on Elena's. One more hour. They'd come within 1 hour of dying on that island. We were lucky, he said. You were resourceful. Most people wouldn't have lasted 3 days in your condition. The doctor checked something on his tablet. The Coast Guard wants to debrief you. Press wants interviews. Your company's board has been calling constantly, but all that can wait until you're stronger. What about her family? Daniel gestured at Elena. Does she have anyone? No emergency contacts on file. We're still trying to track down relatives. She doesn't have any, Daniel said. Or didn't mention any. It was just her. The doctor's expression shifted to something that might have been pity. Then she's lucky she had you. Over the next 3 days, Daniel healed faster than Elena. His broken collarbone was set and casted, his concussion resolved. His dehydration was corrected with IV fluids. By day 4, he was walking again, slowly but upright. Elena remained unconscious. Daniel visited every day, sat beside her bed, talked to her about the island, about Sophie, about the life waiting for her when she woke up. The nurses smiled sadly and said it was good that someone was there because everyone needed an advocate. On day 5, Elena's eyes opened. Daniel was mid-sentence telling her about Sophie's insistence on hearing every detail of their survival when Elena's fingers twitched in his hand. He stopped, looked down. Her eyes were open, unfocused, but definitely conscious. Elena? Daniel? Her voice was barely a whisper. Are we dead? No, we're alive. We made it. My leg. I know. I'm sorry. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. They took it. They had to. The infection. I know. The doctor told me before. She closed her eyes. I survived a plane crash and a deserted island just to lose my leg in a hospital. You're alive. That's what matters. Easy for you to say. You still have both legs. Daniel didn't have an answer for that. She was right. He had his leg, his life, his daughter. He'd lost nothing permanent except 2 weeks and some pride. Elena had lost her leg, her job interview, her chance at starting over in Tokyo. Everything she'd been working toward for 8 years, gone. I'm sorry, he said again, because what else was there? Stop apologizing. It's not your fault. Elena opened her eyes again, focused on him properly. Where's Sophie? With my mom. She wanted to meet you. The 7-year-old who draws in purple crayon? That's her. I'd like that. Meeting her. Elena shifted, winced. When I'm less of a disaster. You're not a disaster. I'm missing a leg and hooked to 12 machines. I'm the definition of disaster. You're a survivor. Elena laughed, short and bitter. Survivor. Right. That's what they'll call me. Elena the survivor. Not Elena the translator. Not Elena the mother who lost her daughter. Just Elena who survived. She turned her head to look out the window. What do I do now, Daniel? No job, no savings, no leg. What the hell do I do now? Daniel had been thinking about that, about the unfairness of Elena losing everything while he lost nothing that mattered, about how she'd saved his life repeatedly, and all he'd done in return was drag her through a jungle that destroyed her leg. You come work for me, he said. Elena's head snapped back to look at him. What? My company. We need translators. Spanish, English, Japanese. You speak all 3, right? Daniel, you said you were going to Tokyo for a translator position. I'm offering you the same thing. Better pay, better benefits, and you don't have to move to another country. I can't accept charity. It's not charity. It's hiring someone qualified who saved my life. That's called networking. That's called guilt. Maybe, but the offer's real either way. Daniel squeezed her hand. You don't have to decide now. Think about it. When you're healed, when you're ready, the job's there if you want it. Elena was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything. We both know I wouldn't have survived without you. We survived together. Exactly. So let me help you survive what comes next. She studied his face, looking for something. Eventually, she nodded slowly. Okay, when I'm healed, When I can walk again, or hop, or whatever the hell I'll be doing with one leg. She managed a weak smile. Then we'll talk about this job. Deal. Sophie met Elena the next day. She'd been pestering Daniel constantly about the woman who helped Daddy survive, and Daniel finally gave in. They entered Elena's room together, Sophie hiding slightly behind Daniel's leg. "Elena," Daniel said, "this is Sophie." "Sophie, this is Elena." Sophie peeked out, stared at Elena in the bed, at the monitors, at the obvious shape of missing leg under the blanket. "You're missing a leg," she said with 7-year-old bluntness. "Sophie," Daniel started to apologize, but Elena laughed. "I am. Shark got it." Sophie's eyes went huge. "Really?" "No, infection got it. But shark sounds cooler." "Did it hurt?" "Like you wouldn't believe." Sophie considered this. Then she walked around Daniel and approached the bed, her purple crayon drawing clutched in her hand. "Daddy said you kept him alive, that you knew how to find water and fish and stuff." "We kept each other alive," Elena corrected. "Your dad learned fast, got pretty good at fishing by the end." "Did he tell you about me?" "Every night. You were basically all he talked about." Sophie beamed, held out her drawing. "This is for you. It's you and Daddy on the island. See? There's the fire, and there's the ocean, and there's you guys being brave." Elena took the drawing with shaking hands. It showed 2 stick figures on a beach, a fire between them, purple stars overhead. One figure had black hair like Elena. The other had Daniel's suit, somehow rendered in crayon. "It's perfect," Elena whispered. "You can keep it. Daddy says you don't have family, so now you have us. Right, Daddy?" Daniel's throat closed up. He managed to nod. "Right," Elena said softly, tears running down her face. "Now I have you." The recovery took weeks. Elena had to learn to balance, to move, to exist with a body that had different physics now. Physical therapists worked with her daily. Occupational therapists taught her how to do basic tasks. Prosthetist consultations discussed options for when the amputation site healed enough. Daniel visited every day, brought Sophie when he could, handled the press coverage, the Coast Guard interviews, the company board meetings that required his attention. His CFO had kept the Singapore merger alive through the crisis. His team had handled everything in his absence. The empire hadn't crumbled, but Daniel found he cared less about that than he expected. What he cared about was Elena's progress. Sophie's nightmares about plane crashes. The way both of them were learning to process trauma that would probably never fully heal. On week 3, Elena took her first steps on crutches, made it 10 feet before exhaustion forced her to stop. But she was standing, moving, fighting back against the body that had betrayed her. "Good?" Daniel asked. "Terrible. Everything hurts and I almost fell twice." But she was smiling. "Tomorrow I'll make it 20 feet. I believe you." "You better. I didn't survive your company on a death island just to give up now." "It wasn't that bad." "Daniel, we almost died 6 different ways. It was absolutely that bad." "But we didn't die." "No, we didn't." Elena looked at him seriously. "Why are you really here? You're healed. Sophie needs you. Your company needs you. You don't have to keep visiting." "I want to." "Why?" Daniel thought about how to answer that, about what Elena had become to him during those 6 days when survival was the only thing that mattered. "Because you're family now," he said finally. "Sophie said it herself. We survived something impossible together. That creates a bond. A trauma bond." "Maybe, but it's real either way." He moved closer. "You saved my life. Multiple times. Let me help save yours." Elena's eyes welled up. "I don't know how to accept help." "Then learn, because you're stuck with us now. Me, Sophie, my overbearing mother, all of it." "That's a lot of cross-family." "You have no idea." She laughed despite her tears. "Okay, family. I can try that. That's all I'm asking." By week 6, Elena was walking short distances on crutches. By week 8, she was fitted for a prosthetic. By week 10, she was taking her first steps on it, wobbly and uncertain, but upright. Daniel was there for all of it, brought Sophie when progress deserved celebrating, made plans for when Elena was discharged, She'd stay with them temporarily, just until she found her own place, got back on her feet both literally and figuratively. The press had finally moved on to other stories. The Coast Guard had published their report, confirming that Daniel and Elena were the only survivors of the charter flight crash. 22 people dead, 2 alive. Statistics that didn't capture the reality of 6 days fighting for survival. On Elena's discharge day, Daniel brought the car around, helped her into the passenger seat. Sophie bounced in the back, chattering about how Elena would have her own room and they could watch movies and make popcorn, and it would be like a sleepover, except Elena would live with them. Just temporarily, Daniel reminded Sophie. Or forever, Sophie countered. Forever's good too. Elena caught Daniel's eye in the rearview mirror. Something passed between them. Understanding, gratitude. The recognition that they'd built something on that island that couldn't be destroyed by rescue or hospitals or returning to normal life. They'd built trust, partnership, family. Forever sounds good, Elena said quietly. Daniel drove them home through San Francisco traffic, Sophie singing in the back, Elena watching the city pass by with eyes that had seen too much ocean. When they pulled up to his building, the penthouse he'd bought 3 years ago because successful people lived in penthouses, Elena stared up at it with an expression Daniel couldn't read. That's a lot of building, she said. It's excessive, I know. I was going to say impressive, but excessive works too. They rode the elevator to the top floor. Daniel's mother had prepared Elena's room. Fresh sheets, flowers, everything welcoming. Sophie dragged Elena on a tour, showing her every room, every closet, every window with its view of the bay. And this is my room, Sophie announced, opening her door to reveal purple everything. You can visit whenever. Daddy says I should give you space, but space is boring. Visiting is better. I'll visit a lot, Elena promised. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Daniel and Elena sat on the balcony overlooking the city. Elena's prosthetic was off, crutches nearby. She looked exhausted, but more alive than she had in weeks. Thank you, she said. For what? All of it. The job offer, the place to stay, the family that adopted me without asking if I wanted to be adopted. She smiled. It's overwhelming, but good overwhelming. You're welcome, though really I should be thanking you. We've been through this. We saved each other. I know, but Daniel stopped, started again. The island changed me, being that helpless, that dependent, that out of control. It stripped away all the stuff I thought made me who I was. The money, the company, the success. And what was left was just me. A guy who didn't know how to fish or make fire or survive without help. That's not a bad thing. No, it's not. It's humbling, necessary probably. He looked at the city lights. I'm trying to be different, more present with Sophie, less obsessed with work. More aware that everything I built could disappear tomorrow, and the only thing that would matter is the people I love. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I hated you on the plane. What? When I saw you in your private cabin with your expensive scotch and your complete oblivion to everyone else on board, I hated you. Hated what you represented. All that wealth and privilege while I was crammed in a middle seat I'd saved 6 months to afford. She laughed softly. Then the plane crashed and none of that mattered anymore. You were just another scared person trying to survive. I'm sorry I was oblivious. Don't be. You're less oblivious now. That's what matters. She turned to look at him. We're both different people than we were on that plane. The island did that. Made us better. Stranger, but better. Daniel thought about that. About the version of himself that had boarded that plane. Distracted, distant, so focused on the merger that he'd barely registered the other passengers. About the version that had stumbled off the rescue helicopter. Broken, humbled, fundamentally changed. To being better, he said, raising an imaginary glass. To being stranger, Elena countered, raising her own. They clinked their invisible glasses and laughed and sat together watching the city that had almost lost them both. Somewhere below, life went on. Meetings happened. Deals closed. The world turned indifferent to their survival. But up here, on this balcony, 2 people who had every reason to give up had chosen instead to fight, to survive, to build something new from the wreckage of what they'd lost. Tomorrow, Elena would start physical therapy to improve her prosthetic usage. Daniel would return to work part-time, easing back into leadership. Sophie would go to school and tell her friends about the island and how her dad was a hero, even though he said he wasn't. Tomorrow was full of ordinary challenges that felt manageable compared to finding water on a deserted beach. But tonight, they were just two survivors enjoying the simple miracle of being alive. And that was enough. 3 months after the rescue, Elena stood in Daniel's office on the 42nd floor and stared at the contract in front of her. "This is too much," she said. Daniel looked up from his laptop. It's standard for senior translators. Senior translators with experience, with credentials, with both legs. She immediately regretted the last part, but it slipped out anyway. Still raw, still angry about it sometimes. "Elena, don't do the pity thing." She pushed the contract back across his desk. "I appreciate what you're trying to do. I really do. But I can't take a job I'm not qualified for just because we survived a plane crash together. You're more than qualified. You speak 3 languages fluently, you have a degree in linguistics, and you spent 6 years working translation jobs before the crash." Daniel stood, came around the desk. "This isn't charity. This is me hiring someone capable who happens to also be someone I trust. You trust me because we were stuck on an island together. I trust you because I watched you solve problems under impossible pressure, because you kept us both alive when giving up would have been easier, because you're smart and resourceful and you don't quit even when you should." He paused. "That's exactly what I need in my company." Elena wanted to argue more, wanted to insist she didn't deserve this, that she was still learning to walk properly on her prosthetic, that accepting felt like weakness. But the truth was simpler and harder. She needed this job. Her savings were gone. Her old apartment was gone, sublet when she'd left for Tokyo. Her entire life before the crash had dissolved like smoke. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll take it. But I earn this. I do the work, I meet the standards, I prove I deserve to be here. Deal. You start Monday. That's in 3 days. Is that a problem? I thought I'd have more time to prepare." Daniel smiled. "Elena, you survived on a deserted island with a broken billionaire who didn't know how to open a coconut. You're ready." She laughed despite herself. "You learned, eventually. Only because you threatened to push me into the ocean. I was serious about that threat. I know. That's why I learned." They stood there grinning at each other like idiots, and Elena realized something had shifted. Somewhere between the hospital and the balcony conversations and Sophie's constant visits to her room, they'd stopped being survivors thrown together by catastrophe. They'd become something else. Friends, maybe. Or family, like Sophie kept insisting. "I should go," Elena said. "Physical therapy in an hour." "How's that going?" "Terrible. Everything hurts, and my prosthetist says I'm pushing too hard." She shrugged. "But I can walk 3 miles now without stopping. That's progress." "That's incredible. That's necessary. I'm not spending the rest of my life limited by what happened on that island." Elena grabbed her bag, adjusted her gait to accommodate the prosthetic she was still getting used to. "See you Monday?" "See you Monday." Elena made it to the elevator before the panic hit. Not fear of the job, not anxiety about her leg. Something deeper. The sudden overwhelming certainty that she didn't belong in Daniel's world of glass towers and executive contracts. That she was still just Elena from the middle seat, playing dress-up in a life she hadn't earned. She leaned against the elevator wall, breathing through it. The therapist had warned her about this. Trauma responses that came from nowhere, triggered by nothing specific. Your brain trying to process impossible survival by finding new things to fear. The elevator doors opened on the lobby. Elena forced herself to straighten, to walk normally, to look like someone who belonged. She made it to the street before her phone rang. Sophie's name lit up the screen. Not Daniel. Sophie had insisted on having Elena's number for emergencies, though most of her calls were about homework questions or requests to come watch a movie. "Hey, Bug," Elena answered. "Elena, are you coming for dinner? Daddy's making pasta and he's really bad at it, but Grandma's helping, so it might be okay." "I have physical therapy tonight." "Skip it. You do therapy all the time. We have pasta never." "Your dad makes pasta every week." "Yeah, but you're never here for it. Please? I want to show you my science project. It's about survival, and I based it on you and Daddy. Elena's chest tightened. What kind of science project? How people adapt to new environments. I'm doing a presentation next week, and I need to interview you about the island, about how you learn to survive. Sophie's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Also, Daddy's been weird all day. I think he needs you to tell him he's being stupid about something. I'm not sure that's my job. It totally is. You're like family now. Family tells each other when they're being stupid. Elena looked at her phone calendar. Physical therapy could be rescheduled, and the idea of going back to her temporary room in Daniel's apartment, her room that was starting to feel permanent even though it wasn't supposed to be, was more appealing than she wanted to admit. Okay, I'll be there in an hour. Yes, I'll tell Daddy to make extra. Sophie hung up before Elena could change her mind. Dinner was chaos in the best way. Daniel's mother had taken over the kitchen, correcting his pasta technique while Sophie narrated her science project at top volume. Elena sat at the counter, supposedly supervising, but mostly just watching the strange family she'd stumbled into. So the hypothesis is that humans can adapt to any environment if properly motivated, Sophie read from her notes. And my primary sources are you and Daddy surviving on an island, even though neither of you knew how to survive. That's accurate, Elena confirmed. What was the hardest part? The hunger? The injuries? The not knowing if you'd be rescued? Elena thought about it. About 6 days of pain and fear and fighting, about what had actually threatened to break them. The hopelessness, she said finally, when the storm destroyed everything we'd built, when we'd lost our shelter and our signals and most of our supplies, that moment when giving up seemed smarter than fighting, Sophie wrote furiously. But you didn't give up. No, your dad wouldn't let me. Elena glanced at Daniel, who was determinedly not looking at her. He reminded me that we were partners, that we didn't quit on each other. That's good. That's really good for my conclusion about teamwork. Sophie kept writing. Did you think you were going to die? Sophie, Daniel's mother interjected. Maybe that's too personal. It's okay, Elena said. Yes, I thought we were going to die, especially when my leg got infected. I was pretty sure I'd die on that island. But you didn't. No, I didn't, Elena smiled. I lost my leg in a hospital instead, much less dramatic. Sophie laughed, then immediately looked guilty for laughing. Is it okay to joke about that? It's my leg. I can joke about it if I want. Cool, because some kids at school asked if you were a pirate, and I didn't know if that was mean or funny. Definitely funny. Tell them, yes, I'm a pirate, and I lost my leg fighting a kraken. What's a kraken? Giant octopus. Very scary. Tentacles everywhere. Sophie's eyes went wide. Really? No, but it's a better story than infection. They ate pasta that was slightly overcooked, and garlic bread that was slightly burned, and salad that Daniel's mother had made, because apparently vegetables were non-negotiable. It was normal and domestic, and absolutely nothing like Elena's life before the crash. Before, she'd eaten alone in her tiny apartment. Before, she'd counted pennies and skipped meals and told herself that Tokyo would fix everything. Before, she'd been so focused on escaping her past that she'd never stopped to build a present. Now she sat at a table with people who cared if she showed up for dinner, who asked about her day, who included her in their chaos without making it feel like charity. It was terrifying how much she didn't want to lose this. After dinner, after Sophie went to bed, after Daniel's mother left with pointed comments about giving them privacy, Elena and Daniel ended up on the balcony again. It had become their spot, the place where they could talk without pretending everything was fine. She's going to ace that science project, Elena said. She's going to traumatize her entire class with stories about infections and amputations. Character building. That's one way to put it. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? Depends on the question. Are you happy here? Living with us, I mean? Taking the job, all of it. Elena considered lying, saying, of course, everything's great. I'm so grateful. But they'd survived too much together for polite lies. I don't know, she said honestly. Some days, yes. Some days I feel like I'm playing house in someone else's life, and any minute you're going to realize I don't belong here. You belong here. Daniel, I'm serious. Sophie adores you. My mother thinks you're the best thing that's happened to this family in years. And He stopped. started again. I need you here, not just because you saved my life, because you make this better, make me better. Elena's heart was doing something complicated in her chest. That's a lot of pressure. I know. I'm sorry, I didn't say it was bad pressure. She turned to face him. I'm just not used to mattering to people. After Isabella died, after her father left, I spent 8 years being basically invisible, working jobs where I was replaceable, living in places where nobody noticed if I came or went. Tokyo was supposed to change that, but the plane crashed. But the plane crashed. And I ended up here instead, in your world, your family, your life. She laughed softly. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. For you to realize this was all just trauma bonding, and once enough time passes, we'll have nothing in common. Daniel was quiet for so long, Elena thought she'd said too much, pushed too hard, revealed the fear that kept her awake some nights, that rescue had saved her life but cost her the one relationship that felt real. Then he said, "What if it's not trauma bonding?" What? What if what we built on that island was real? What if the crash just forced us to skip all the bullshit small talk and get straight to the important stuff? He moved closer. I've known you for 3 months, but I trust you more than people I've known for years. Does that sound like trauma bonding to you? I don't know, maybe. The therapist says, forget the therapist for a second. What do you think? Elena looked at him. At this man who'd been a stranger on a plane, an unwilling partner on an island, and was now, what? Friend didn't cover it. Family was close, but not quite right. Something else. Something she didn't have words for. I think I'm scared, she said finally. Scared this is temporary. Scared I'll lose you like I've lost everyone else. Scared that the only reason you care is because I kept you alive long enough to make it home to Sophie. That's not the only reason. Then what's the other reason? Daniel looked at her like she was being deliberately dense. Because you're you, Elena. Because you're stubborn and smart and you don't take my shit even when you probably should. Because Sophie lights up when you walk in the room. Because watching you fight your way back from an amputation made me realize what real strength looks like. He paused. Because somewhere between learning to fish and shooting that last flare, I stopped seeing you as the woman from 18C and started seeing you as someone I couldn't imagine my life without. Elena's breath caught. Daniel, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. He stepped back, giving her space. The job offer's real regardless. You can stay in the apartment as long as you need. None of that changes based on whatever this is between us. What if I want it to change? Daniel went very still. What? What if I'm tired of being careful, of protecting myself from getting hurt by never letting anyone close? Elena moved toward him, her prosthetic making the movement slightly awkward, but she didn't care. What if I want to find out what this is? What we could be if we stop pretending we're just survivor buddies helping each other recover? Elena, if you're only saying this because you feel obligated, I'm saying this because I'm terrified and I'm doing it anyway, because you taught me that on the island, that sometimes you jump even when you don't know if there's a raft waiting. They stood there on the balcony, the city lights spreading below them, the distance between them suddenly feeling like the most important space in the world. Daniel closed it first. The kiss was tentative, careful, nothing like the dramatic reunions in movies, just two broken people finding something gentle in each other. When they pulled apart, Elena was crying. Sorry, she said. I don't know why I'm crying. It's okay. It's not. This is supposed to be a happy moment, and I'm ruining it. You're not ruining anything. Daniel wiped her tears with his thumb. We're both disasters. That's kind of our thing. Elena laughed through her tears. We really are disasters. The best disasters. That's not how disasters work. Then we're rewriting the rules. They stood together until the tears stopped, until Elena's breathing evened out, until the moment settled into something that felt sustainable instead of overwhelming. So, Elena said eventually, what now? Now you start work Monday. You keep living here until you decide if you want to stay permanently. We see where this goes. Daniel squeezed her hand. No pressure, no expectations, just us figuring it out together. That's terrifyingly reasonable. I've been practicing being reasonable. Sophie's therapist said it's important for modeling healthy relationships. You're taking parenting advice from Sophie's therapist. I'm taking advice from everyone. Turns out I don't know what I'm doing most of the time. Join the club, Elena said. I haven't known what I'm doing since approximately the moment the plane started falling. And yet here we are. Here we are. The next few months unfolded in a pattern Elena was still learning to trust. Monday through Friday, she worked as a translator at Daniel's company, handling international contracts and client communications. Evenings were dinner with Daniel and Sophie, homework help, movie nights, the ordinary rhythm of family life. Weekends were physical therapy, walks in the park with Sophie, Sunday dinners where Daniel's mother asked pointed questions about their relationship status. Elena deflected. Daniel deflected. They were together but taking it slow, which apparently wasn't a satisfactory answer for anyone except them. 6 months after the rescue, Elena moved into her own apartment 3 blocks away. Not because she wanted distance, but because she needed to prove to herself that she could stand on her own, that she wasn't just dependent on Daniel's charity. Sophie cried when she left. But you're part of the family, Sophie protested. Family lives together. Family can live close and still be family, Elena countered. I'll see you all the time, probably more than you want. Impossible. I always want to see you. Daniel helped move her stuff, which wasn't much since she'd lost everything in the crash and had been slowly rebuilding. A few clothes, some books, the purple crayon drawing Sophie had given her that first day in the hospital. You sure about this? Daniel asked as they set up her new bedroom. No, but I'm doing it anyway. Elena looked around at the small space that was entirely hers. I need to know I can do this. Build a life that's mine, even if you're part of it. I get that. Do you? Because you've never had to rebuild from nothing. That's fair. Daniel set down the box he was carrying. But for what it's worth, I think you're the strongest person I know. You'll be fine here. What if I'm not? Then I'm 3 blocks away, so is Sophie. So is the job and the family and everything else. He pulled her close. You're not alone anymore, Elena, even when you want to be. She kissed him for that, for understanding, for not trying to fix everything, for just being present. 1 year after the crash, the Coast Guard invited them to a memorial ceremony for the victims. 22 names read aloud, 22 lives ended by an engine failure and bad luck. Daniel and Elena stood in the back holding hands, listening to families cry for people who hadn't made it. We should have died too, Elena whispered. But we didn't. Why us? Why did we survive when they didn't? Daniel had asked himself that question 1,000 times. Had no good answer except chance and desperation, and maybe the fact that they'd found each other in the chaos. I don't know, he said, but I think we owe it to them to make it matter, to build something with the life we got to keep. Like what? Like a foundation. For trauma survivors, people recovering from disasters. We could fund therapy, prosthetics, rehabilitation, help people rebuild like you've been rebuilding. Elena looked at him. You've been thinking about this. For months, I wanted to talk to you first, make sure it wasn't just guilt talking. It's definitely partly guilt. But is it a good idea? Elena thought about it. About the hospital bills she couldn't have paid without Daniel's help. About the prosthetic that cost more than she'd made in a year. About the therapy and the time and the resources that had made survival possible. It's a good idea, she said. Let's do it. They called it the Second Chance Foundation, funded it with money from Daniel's company and donations from other survivors. Elena ran the translator program, helping refugees and immigrants navigate systems in their new languages. Daniel handled the administrative side, using his business skills for something that mattered beyond profit margins. Sophie volunteered after school, reading to younger kids in the rehabilitation center they opened. She was 10 now, older, and somehow both more and less scarred by what had happened to her father. She understood he'd almost died, understood Elena had saved him, understood that life was fragile and people didn't always come home. But she also understood that they had come home, that against impossible odds, they'd survived. And that meant something. 2 years after the crash, Daniel proposed on the anniversary of their rescue. Not elaborate or romantic, just a quiet question on their balcony, while Elena was complaining about a difficult translation project. Marry me, he said. Elena stopped mid-sentence. What? Marry me. Make this official. Let Sophie stop asking when you're moving back in. That's possibly the least romantic proposal in history. I know, but I mean it. Daniel got down on one knee, which was awkward because the balcony was small and Elena nearly tripped over him. Elena Ruiz, you saved my life, changed my perspective, and made me believe in second chances. Will you marry me? Elena looked at him kneeling there, earnest and ridiculous and absolutely serious. Thought about the woman she'd been on that plane, angry, isolated, running from a past she couldn't fix. Thought about the woman she'd become, scarred but stronger, damaged but loved, alive in ways that mattered. Yes, she said, but only if we can have a small wedding. I don't want some big expensive thing. Whatever you want. And Sophie gets to be maid of honor. She'll love that. And we're writing our own vows because I'm not promising to obey anyone. Daniel laughed. Deal. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the Foundation Center. 20 people total. Sophie, Daniel's mother, Elena's old boss from Puerto Rico who flew in as her only family representative, and staff from the foundation who'd become their community. Sophie cried through the whole thing. Happy tears, she insisted, though Elena suspected some of them were relief that her makeshift family was becoming official. The vows were simple. Daniel promised to never stop learning, to listen even when he thought he knew better, to be present for the life they were building together. Elena promised to let herself be loved, to accept help when she needed it, to believe she deserved the happiness she'd found. Neither of them promised forever. They'd learned on that island that forever wasn't guaranteed. What they promised instead was today, tomorrow, the next challenge, and the one after that, to face whatever came as partners who'd already survived the impossible. 3 years after the crash, Elena stood in the Foundation Rehabilitation Center watching a new amputee take her first steps on a prosthetic. The woman was crying, frustrated, convinced she'd never walk normally again. It gets easier, Elena said. Everyone says that. Everyone's right. Look, Elena walked across the room and back, her gait so smooth now that most people didn't notice the prosthetic unless she told them. 3 years ago, I could barely stand. Now I run 5Ks. How? Practice, physical therapy, stubbornness. Elena smiled, and believing that what I lost doesn't define what I can become. The woman nodded slowly, tried another step, stumbled, caught herself. Better, Elena encouraged. Try again. She stayed until the woman's session ended, then headed home. Home was still Daniel's apartment, which had become their apartment when she'd officially moved back in after the wedding. Sophie had her own room but spent half her night sleeping between them anyway, claiming nightmares, though Elena suspected she just liked the company. Daniel was in the kitchen attempting dinner when Elena arrived. He'd gotten better at cooking over the years, though better was relative. How was the center? He asked. Good. New patient. Recent amputation. She's struggling. You'll help her. I hope so. Elena grabbed a knife and started chopping vegetables because otherwise Daniel would burn them. Sophie called. Her science project got selected for the regional competition. The one about survival adaptation? She's been refining it for 3 years. At this point, it's more thesis than middle school project. Daniel laughed. She gets that from you, the obsessive perfectionism. She gets it from both of us. We're both disasters who refuse to quit. True. They cooked together in comfortable silence. This was life now. Ordinary evenings, ordinary problems, ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because they'd almost lost the chance to have them. After dinner, after Sophie went to bed, Elena and Daniel ended up on the balcony. Still their spot. Still where they went to remember. Do you ever think about it? Elena asked. The island? All the time. Me too. Sometimes I dream I'm still there. That the rescue never happened. That we're still trying to survive. Nightmares? Sometimes just dreams. Reminders that we made it. Elena leaned against the railing, looking at the city that had become home. You know what's weird? I hated you on that plane. Thought you represented everything wrong with the world. And now? Now I can't imagine my life without you. She turned to look at him. The crash was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Cost me my leg, nearly cost me my life. But it also gave me this, you, Sophie, a family, a purpose. Things I never would have found if that plane hadn't gone down. That's a complicated way to think about trauma. We're complicated people. We survived a plane crash together. Complicated is kind of our baseline. Daniel pulled her close. I love you. I know. That's not the proper response. I love you too. Obviously. I married you. Elena rested her head on his shoulder. Thank you for not letting me give up. On the island, in the hospital. All the times I wanted to quit because it was too hard. You never would have quit. I might have, without you. Then I guess we saved each other. They stood together as the city lights blinked on below, as evening turned to night, as the world kept spinning indifferent to their small miracle of survival. Somewhere out there, the island still existed, unchanged, uncaring, waiting for the next desperate people who'd need its harsh lessons. But Daniel and Elena were done with islands. They'd learned what they needed to learn, built what they needed to build, found in each other something worth more than rescue. Sophie appeared in the balcony doorway, rubbing her eyes. Can't sleep, she announced. Nightmares? Elena asked. No, just thinking too much about the science competition. Come here. Daniel made room for her between them. Sophie squeezed in and they stood together, this strange family built from catastrophe, held together by choice. A billionaire who'd learned humility. A survivor who'd learned to accept help. A child who'd learned that people could leave and still come back. Tell me the island story, Sophie said. The real one, not the science project version. Elena and Daniel exchanged glances. They told her the sanitized version, the survival, the rescue, the happy ending. But Sophie was 13 now, old enough for truth. What do you want to know? Daniel asked. Were you really that scared? Or do you just say that? Terrified, Elena said honestly. Every single day, scared we'd starve, scared we wouldn't be rescued, scared I'd die from infection and your dad would be alone. But you weren't alone, you had each other. Yes, we had each other, and that was enough? Daniel thought about those 6 days, about hunger and pain and the constant calculation of survival, about Elena's fever and his broken shoulder and the storm that nearly killed them both. It had to be enough, he said, so we made it enough. Sophie considered this, then she nodded, satisfied. That's good. That's the part that matters. She yawned. Can I sleep in your room tonight? You're 13. Aren't you too old for that? I'm never too old for family. Sophie headed back inside. Come on, I'll take the middle. Elena and Daniel followed her in, leaving the balcony and its memories behind. Tomorrow, there'd be work and physical therapy and Sophie's science competition prep. Tomorrow, there'd be ordinary challenges and ordinary joys. But tonight, they'd sleep together in a too-crowded bed, this family that shouldn't exist but did anyway. Built from wreckage and stubbornness and the simple refusal to let catastrophe have the last word. The island had tried to kill them. Instead, it had taught them how to live. And that made all the difference.